exclusivity. As a dual agent, there is no exclusivity. As a dual agent, we as the firm represent both clients in the transaction. Remember, we're straddling the wall. Once we go into designated, 2 agents and only 2 agents have been designated. Everybody else remains in dual. And the 2 caveats to designated: you cannot be designated if you've received prior confidential information about the other party, and you cannot be designated, a broker in charge and a provisional broker cannot be designated opposite of each other. Questions on that? Comments? Okay. So where we left on Tuesday, we were talking about, we've seen this before. This is a little recap. So we left talking about a working with real estate agent disclosure. We introduced the idea to you. PT means problem topic. So we introduced the idea to you. And then we actually went and looked at the agency disclosure, and we looked at the Q&A brochure. Again, those are tools provided to us to help us explain it to the public. Right? At some point, you guys are going to get your license and you're going to be meeting buyers and sellers for the first time, and you have to explain your role. And the forms, the tools, the Q&A brochures help us formulate, help us put words in our mouth. So this is what we saw the other day. The problem topic on this first bullet point, your test, somebody accused me of tricking you earlier. Your test actually does like to trick you in some cases. And your test might say something like, working with real estate agent is mandatory for all real estate transactions. All transactions. Is that true or false? Do your head one way or the other. All transactions? No, not all. Why? Because it doesn't include what kind of transactions? Lease. Working with real estate is not required for lease, thus, it's not required for all transactions. See how one word changes the meaning of the whole thing, doesn't it? So the problem topic on that first bullet point is that it's only mandatory for sales transactions. And we specified commercial sales is a sales transaction. So residential sales and commercial sales. We're going to talk a little bit more about first substantial contact today. So we'll answer all those questions. Discuss that a little bit further. Once we get the disclosure signed by the consumer, and I'll talk a little bit more about that today as well. So once we get the disclosure signed by the consumer, we have to keep it in our file, in our transaction file, for 3 years. Guess what? We keep everything for at least 3 years. We'll learn that when we get to licensed law and commission rule. So when we get to that point and I say, how long do we keep everything? You guys can all say at least 3 years. And I'll go, wow, good job. So we keep everything because we're documenting what? We're documenting everything. So how long do we keep everything? For at least 3 years. Okay. The e-world, the e-cloud, whatever you call it, has made it a lot easier for us. Can you imagine all the dang file cabinets we had prior to the internet? I wasn't joking the other day when I talked about the file cabinet room. We don't have to worry about that now. Probably the biggest purpose, the biggest reason why we do our working with real estate agent disclosure, we got to let the consumer know, I don't owe you confidentiality until you hire me. So if you never hire me, do I ever owe you confidentiality? No. No. You got to hire me to reserve that right for me to keep my mouth shut, for me not to share personal confidential information about you. So that's the main purpose of the disclosure. We also need to let the consumer know, I represent the seller, I represent the buyer. Let them know what side of the transaction we're on. Remember, if I'm doing an open house on Sunday and a buyer comes in and starts talking, the buyer needs to know that when they're talking to me, they might as well be talking directly to the seller. So if they come in and say, I'm willing to go 30,000 over asking price, they just told me something that I need to share with my seller. What's the seller going to do with that information, right? They're going to counter it. Yeah, they're going to counter it. You guys see what I'm saying? So first substantial contact, and again, we're getting ready to talk about it. We always need to be on alert for first substantial contact. That's worth me saying again. We always need to be on alert for first substantial contact because, guys, I'm here to tell you, people talk. It blows my mind. Have you ever met a complete stranger in the store and they just walked up to you and started telling you their life story? People talk. We are the ones that have to protect the consumer. You guys with me? They don't know my role. They don't know my responsibility. And that's why I have to say, stop talking. I believe this is the last thing that we discussed on Tuesday before we looked at the disclosure and the Q&A brochure. So the purpose, let them know that we don't owe them confidentiality. And we're going to introduce the consumer to the available options that our firm offers. So remember, we looked at our disclosure. Do we offer single agency? Do we offer dual agency? Do we offer designated? Or do we offer the services for an unrepresented seller or buyer? So this is where we are so far. So here's our first new slide. The Real Estate Commission says, once we provide the disclosure, at that point, we need to determine in what capacity we're going to work. Remember, I have different duties that I owe my client. I have different duties that I owe my customer, right? My client gets what? I can see your mouths move. My client gets old car. My customer gets honesty, fairness, and the disclosure material facts. Those are two different things, aren't they? So if I don't identify our role at the beginning, how do I know how to proceed? So the commission says once we disclose, we need to determine in what capacity we're going to work. Are you going to hire me? And if so, will you allow dual agency? Will you allow designated? Again, we'll look at our forms. Our forms helps us with that. We'll see those when we get into Unit 8. So let's talk about this first substantial contact. We can talk about the property all day long. The concern comes when the conversation switches gears from the property to the people. And specifically, when we start discussing the consumer's PTM, price, term, and motive. When we talk about price, how much under asking price is the seller willing to accept? How much over offer price is the buyer willing to go? Terms. What are acceptable terms? We're going to look at the terms in our contract, but some examples might be closing. If you have to close within, I got to buy a house within 2 months. That kind of created a sense of urgency, didn't it? So that may reveal something. And then motive. Why are they buying? Why are they selling? Guys, when you guys get out there and start doing in business and you start doing open houses, I need you to prepare for 2 questions from practically every single buyer that comes into your open house. They all want to know, why are they selling? Quite frankly, I don't think it's any of their business, but can I disclose why my seller is selling? Can I tell a consumer why my seller is selling? That's kind of a trick question. I can if I have their written permission, right? So as long as I have their written permission, be prepared for that question. Ask your seller. I'm doing an open house on Sunday and buyers are going to ask me why you're selling. Sometimes I want to tell them that like I said, I don't think it's any of their business sometimes. I really want to tell them sometimes that the ghost has mold, but I don't. I do good. So why are they selling? Ask your seller if you can share that with buyers. And the second question you're going to get is, does the refrigerator stay? So go ahead and ask those up front. There's a little insight for you. But go ahead and get that information. The seller may or may not want you to disclose why they're selling. If they're relocating jobs and moving halfway across the country, that's a different motivation than trying to settle this before the divorce attorney kicks in, right? Different motivations could be different, and it's up to the seller if we disclose that or not. Again, this idea of first substantial contact, we need to be on alert anytime you're acting in the capacity of a real estate agent. So if your phone rings, if you're getting a call off of your yard sign, your for sale sign, couldn't first substantial contact happen on the phone? What if somebody sends you an email or a website inquiry? Couldn't first substantial contact happen in writing or on the website inquiry? When you join your firm, one thing that they may suggest that you do is wear your name tag everywhere you go. Why do they want you to wear your name tag? So people will come up to you in public and start talking about real estate, right? People love to talk about real estate, especially crazy markets like we're in right now. As soon as they know that you're in real estate, they want to know what's going on with this market. What's tomorrow look like? So if you're in aisle 4 of Harris Teeter wearing your name badge, don't you need to be on alert for first substantial contact? Somebody could bump into your cart and say, oh, wow, you're in real estate. Well, I've been thinking about selling or buying, and we really got to do something sooner rather than later. And this is all in front of the serial, right? So whenever you're acting in the capacity of an agent, you always need to be on alert for first substantial contact. My husband calls me a traveling billboard. If you ever get behind me at a stoplight, you will know. How will you know? My name, my phone number, my email address, the fact that I'm a real estate professional and my firm are on my back windshield. Everywhere I go in my vehicle, am I acting like a capacity of an agent? Could first substantial contact happen at the drive-thru at McDonald's? Possibly. We always need to be on alert. And it's rude to interrupt people when they're talking. In this case, it's rude to let them keep talking because they have a right to know where my loyalty is. They have a right to know that I don't owe them that confidentiality. If first substantial contact happens in person, face to face, maybe at an open house, maybe at aisle 4 at Harris Teeter. If it happens face to face, we provide and discuss the brochure immediately. Let's go out to my car. I carry these things in my trunk. Let's go out to my car and have a conversation about real estate. But before we say much more, let me explain to you that I don't owe you confidentiality. If first substantial contact happens by phone or electronic means, we still discuss it with them. But now the rules say that we have up to 3 days to deliver the brochure. So we're not negating the discussion. We're still having the reply to the email or stop them talking on the phone. Oh, and let me get your email address so I can email you this brochure. You guys do your head one way or the other. Can I make anybody do anything? As much as I wish I could, can I make anybody? No, I can't make anybody do a thing, can I? So what if the consumer looks at you and says, I'm not signing that? Are you kidding me? If they refuse to sign, we still try to have a conversation with them. We owe them that. And we write refuse to sign on the disclosure. Try to get them initial it if you can. Again, I can't make anybody do anything, but the least I can do is protect myself by giving them the information, still discussing it with them, still providing them the information, but actually writing refuse to sign. If you know a name, you can write the name. If you're in Harris Teeter, you may not get a name, right? So you just want to give, I mean, how much detail you put on there is up to you. But if they refuse to sign, and guys, some agents think, oh, well, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to write refuse to sign on 10 of them and call it good for the year. If the commission sees all of your working with real estate agent disclosures say refuse to sign, they're going to start questioning you. It should be the norm. I mean, in all my years, I've only had one person refuse to sign it, if that tells you anything. I think if we're doing our job right, these are one of these things that it takes practice. I promise you, the first couple times you do your agency disclosure, it's going to be bumpy and it's going to be awkward. And it's going to be something like mandatory disclosure, confidentiality, you know, and it's going to not sound good. But I promise you, The more you do it, the better you get. Think of it as your elevator speech. The more you practice it, the more you do it, the better you're going to get. I guarantee you. So let's talk about what the rules say, what the commission rules say. If you're communicating with a prospective buyer or seller, the rule says that we do our disclosure at first substantial contact. So you meet somebody at an open house, you meet a seller for the first time, you're getting ready for a listing appointment. We'll talk about your listing appointment in Unit 8. Maybe you're meeting a buyer for the first time in a buyer consultation. If they're a prospective buyer or seller, we disclose at first substantial contact. If you're acting as a seller's agent or a seller sub-agent, and you're communicating with a buyer for the first time, again, we do it at first substantial contact. In other words, you don't have to bombard everybody that comes into your open house. Some people come into your open house, come and go, and all you do is niceties. Hey, how are you? Welcome. Fill in the blank about the weather today, right? That's all you exchange. Have we revealed first substantial contact? What you need to be on the lookout for the open house is the buyer that says, oh my gosh, this is the dream house. I think we're going to make an offer. Okay, stop talking, right? Those are the kind of things whenever you feel that conversation switching gears. There's another rule that says if you're a buyer's agent communicating with the seller, we have to disclose our status, not at first substantial contact, but at initial contact. So if you're already acting in the capacity of a buyer's agent, I got a couple examples we'll go through. Let's make sure first we understand first substantial contact and initial contact. First substantial contact is when that conversation switches gears from the property to the people. Initial contact is, hi, my name is Julie Campbell and I'm working with a buyer. Don't have to wait for first substantial contact. As soon as you meet me, you should know that I'm working with a buyer. You should know that I'm acting on capacity as a buyer. Let's say, for example, you're working with a buyer, you have a buyer's agency agreement, and there's a listing that comes on the market, and your buyer says, I want to see it. You say, great. When do you want to go? They say, today at 2 o'clock. Okay. Here in the Triad, we use a program called Showing Time. Showing Time is a centralized showing service. So I can go into Showing Time and schedule all my showings no matter who has the listing. As long as it's in the Triad MLS, I can go to one place and schedule everything. It's kind of nice. So my buyer says they want to see this home that came on the market today at 2 o'clock. So I go into Showing Time to request the showing. We have to get permission to go on somebody else's property. So I go into Showing Time to request the showing, and I'm asked, what's my role? Am I a buyer's agent, or am I a seller sub-agent, or am I a dual agent? I check the box. When the seller and the seller's agent get notice, get the email, the notice says, Julie Campbell, comma, buyer's agent, comma, wants to see your property today at 2 o'clock. So other than learning my name, the first thing they learned at initial contact was what? That I'm a buyer's agent. The system handles that for us. Thank you, system. Let's say, for example, your buyer wants to see a property today at 2 o'clock. And they say, but before we go, can we ask a couple questions? You say, of course. So you call the listing agent, pick up the phone and call them directly. And you say, hi, my name is Julie Campbell. I'm working with a buyer, or I have a buyer client that would like to see your property this afternoon, but they have a couple questions. As soon as I spit my name out, I'm identifying my role. And that's what we mean by initial contact. We can do this orally when it comes to buyer's agent communicating with the seller. I can do it orally. Everything eventually has to be put in writing. And as we looked at the other day, and we will look at it again in Unit 10, when I'm submitting an offer, I'm identifying my role. Am I the buyer's agent, the seller sub-agent, or a dual agent. So anytime we identify our role, we eventually have to put that in writing. The latest, or the opportunity, I guess I want to say, is when we're presenting the offer. Questions on agency disclosure, confidentiality, first substantial contact? Y'all, I'm telling you, I had a listing one time, and we got a call off of it from the sign. One of my teammates answered the phone, and she answered, hi, thanks for calling. And the lady said, I'm calling about 123 Main Street, and I'm pre-approved for $150,000. We didn't even know the woman's name yet, but we knew what her pre-approval letter said. And I get what she was doing. I understand what she was doing. She was proving to us that she was a serious buyer. She was proving to us that she just wasn't out there kicking the tires. My teammate said, whoa. Please stop talking. What would have happened if she would presented an offer for anything less than 150? What do I have to tell my seller? I know she presented for 140, but I also know she's pre-approved for 150. Do you see how she easily harmed her negotiation power? So we always, and y'all want to know what's sad? I shouldn't have said that. Many agents out there practicing today don't do this properly. Many. If you guys have personal experience, I'm sure you have a story about how you never saw this before, this was never done, Does that give you a ticket to not do it right? I sure hope not. You know what that poor woman said? She said, you are the third real estate company I've called, and you're the first one to explain that to me. So the first two just let her talk. I'm pre-approved, and this is what I want. This is my price, term, and motive, They just let her go. Now, we never had contact with this woman again, but luckily she got a hold of us that explained it to her. The best story I ever heard about working with real estate agent disclosure. A North Carolina real estate commissioner, a member of the real estate commission, was interested in buying a house, and he and his wife went open housing on Sunday. And they walked into a property, and they were talking to the agent, and the commissioner felt that he had crossed the line of talking about the property to talking about he and his wife. And he said, do you have anything you need to talk to me about? And the agent said, And he said, nothing you need to disclose. She went, nope. He said, nothing you need to share with me about he gave her 3 tries before he said, by the way, my name is so-and-so, and I'm a North Carolina real estate commissioner. What do you think she said? I'm sure gulp was up there. There were probably some other words too that flew out of her mouth or went through her mind. Here's the deal, you guys. I don't think anybody's going to get a complaint, the real estate commission. My agent didn't do working with real estate agency disclosure with me. I don't think that's a complaint. But here's the deal. If there is a complaint filed on you and they send you the letter of inquiry, you will always have to respond with your agency disclosure and your agency agreement to this transaction. And if you don't say, I don't have disclosure, that may launch an investigation. That's where agents get in trouble. It's not a direct complaint about failure to disclose, but it's because they have launched an investigation about another complaint. So I got a couple questions. Initial contact, the difference in initial contact and first substantial contact. Meeting me for the first time is initial contact versus first substantial contact is that moment in time the conversation switches gears from the property to the people. You can go back and review that. Let's see. If you come into a contact with a buyer agent or seller agent that represents, they need to sign. That's a good question. Thank you for clarifying. If you come into a buyer in contact, if you are an agent and you come into contact with a buyer's agent or a seller's agent, we don't have to do the working with real estate agent disclosure, but I still have to disclose my status. So we only do, thank you, that's a very good question. We only have to do the disclosure itself for the consumer. When you're talking to the agent, You can say, I have a seller client, I'm working with a buyer. So, and that's what, because this could be talking to a potential buyer or buyer's agent, a potential seller or seller's agent. So if we're talking internally, you just have to disclose. And again, we put that in writing in our offer to purchase and contract. We have a place for me to check my role. There's separate rules when it comes to auctions. Auction sales are totally different. You guys, please listen to me. Let me help you out here. Put auction sales in a totally different bucket than every other residential sales. Auction sales are the exception. The only time you need to worry about auction sales on your tests is when the question specifically asks you about auction sales. If the question never mentions auction sales, then pretend like auction sales don't exist. Okay, so there's residential and commercial sales, and then there's auctions. You only worry about auctions if you're specifically asked about auctions. Otherwise, pretend that they don't exist. Is everybody with me? Working with real estate agency disclosure and auction sales is not required. The auctioneer, I'm on page 166. The auctioneer, it's presumed that the auctioneer represents the seller. We're going to talk a little bit about auction sales in Unit 9. Again, auction sales are a totally separate category. Do not worry about auction sales unless the question specifically says auction sales. Fair enough? Talking just a little bit about our agency arrangements, our agency agreements. Now we're going to look at our agency agreements in Unit 8 when we get there in just a minute. Any agency agreement for the seller or the owner of a property has to be in writing from the onset. I cannot perform a single service for the owner of a property without having a written agency agreement. Let's see, then I got a question. So then how do you come out moving forward with the how do you come out moving forward with the contract? I'm not understanding. And you're welcome to unmute yourself, or if you want to.
Okay, so in the auction transaction, you were explaining that you guys are required the disclosure. So then how do you come about want to proceed with a contract if that's not needed?
So we can still go. So again, we'll talk about an auction, but then auction, we still identify our role on the contract. We just don't have to do the working with real estate agent disclosure at first substantial contact. That's the difference in the auction sale, but we still identify our role on the written contract. Yep. Is that good? Okay, good. So agency agreements, when you're working with the owner of a property, may it's for sale or for lease. Whenever you're working with the owner of a property, I cannot perform a single service for an owner without having our agency agreement in writing. Our buyer's agency agreement and our tenant agreements eventually have to be in writing. But we are allowed to work with a buyer and a tenant at first in an oral buyer agency agreement. We are allowed to work with a buyer or a tenant at first under an oral buyer agency agreement. An oral buyer agency agreement is an agency agreement. Why don't you guys remind me in the chat? What do I owe the buyer once they enter into an agency agreement with me? What do I owe the buyer once they enter into an agency agreement with me? Yes. Even though we are in an oral buyer agency agreement at first, it is still an agency agreement, which means I owe them OCAR. This is an express agreement. Even though it's oral, we still discuss the terms. We still discuss the things that are spelled out. Here's the reason why. The Real Estate Commission recognizes buyers are like these scared, timid little creatures. And nothing will scare a buyer off faster than you saying, hi, my name is Julie, and you're going to hire me, and you're going to be my client. I need you to sign here, date here, and initial here. They're going to turn around and run away, right? Because they're terrified. So the commission allows us to act in an oral capacity at first to build trust, to build that relationship. It's never too early to put our agency agreement in writing. It's never too early. The latest opportunity I have to put our agency agreement in writing is when I'm ready to present an offer on their behalf. Presenting an offer means I'm contacting the listing agent or the for sale by owner and saying, my guys are making an offer. We're discussing the terms, check your inbox. Again, the problem topic, several problem topics on this slide. We're talking about all of it. One of the problem topics, some pre-licensing students think because it's oral, I don't owe them OCAR. It's still an agency agreement. Even though we verbally discuss it, I still owe them OCAR. I'm just curious. In an oral buyer agency agreement, what do you think they owe me? I see head shaking no, and you're absolutely right. They owe me absolutely nothing. So how do I secure my commission? For example, I put it in writing before I present an offer on their behalf. Some firms, some agents will not work under the capacity of an oral buyer agency agreement, and that's okay. If your firm policy or if your personal policy says you only want to work with buyers that sign an agency agreement, you're welcome to. Again, it's never too early to put it in writing, but there is a time that it's too late. This is another one of these things that I don't want you guys to get in your own way. Your test is not going to ask you what you're going to do. Your test is going to ask you what you can do. Can you work with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement at first? Can you? Everybody shake your head yes. Whether or not you choose to or not is, remember our goals. You can worry about how you're going to handle that once you get your license. There are some caveats with oral buyer agency agreement. Oral buyer agency cannot be exclusive. Remember exclusivity. If the buyer is exclusive, how many firms are they dating? If the buyer's exclusive, they're only dating one firm. If it's not exclusive, how many firms can the buyer be dating? They're playing the field now, aren't they? If it's not exclusive, they can date as many firms as they want to. Oral buyer agency cannot bind anybody for a specific period of time. I can't say in an oral agreement, you're going to work with me for 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years, whatever. When you attempt to make the relationship exclusive or you attempt to put a period of time on it, you got to put it in writing. So oral is non-exclusive. Oral is not for a specific time period. If you attempt to do that, then we have to put it in writing. This is worth me all saying again. An oral buyer agency agreement is an agency agreement. It's express, which means I still have a conversation. I still discuss the terms. I still talk about OCAR and dual agency. I still discuss it with them. If this conversation happens face to face or over the phone, the suggestion is that you follow it up with an email. Why? Because we document what? Everything. So if you have a conversation with somebody of substance verbally, for example, creating oral buyer agency, go home and follow it up with an email. Per our conversation, yakety yak. So you have that documentation. Guys, if you got verbal, you got nothing. And you tell them, oral buyer agency, I owe you OCAR. This is the deal with dual agency, yakety yak, all the stuff that's discussed in our written buyer's agency agreement. We have to get it in writing. The latest opportunity I have to get this in writing is when I'm ready to present an offer on somebody's behalf. Oral buyer agency is non-exclusive, and it cannot be for a specific period of time. So again, for example, if your test question says an exclusive buyer agency agreement, you know off the bat it's in writing, because oral can't be exclusive. Question came in. So oral buyer agency gets OCAR and customers get honesty, fairness, and disclosure material facts. That's right. Why? Because an oral buyer agency agreement is an agency agreement. We briefly mentioned express agreement last week. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we get into our contracts. Express agreements mean that the terms are clearly stated. Express can be in writing or verbal. In other words, you guys, you can't just start acting like somebody's agent. You can't just start acting like you have their best interest, that you're loyal to them, that you owe them confidentiality. You can't just start acting like it without first having the discussion. So what if? I hear all the what if. And by the way, we'll see this again. We'll talk about this again in Unit 8. I think the exact same slide, copy and paste. I have no shame. So what if, what if, what if? What if you have a buyer in an oral agreement, you're ready to present the offer on their behalf, but they refuse to sign the agency agreement. So you've been with them for what, a day, a week, whatever, a month, under an oral agreement. They finally find the one, and you say, before I present this offer, I need you to sign our agency agreement. And they say, nope, I'm not going to do it. Once again, I ask you, can I make anybody do anything? Unfortunately, no. If they refuse to sign the agency agreement, then I can no longer represent that buyer as a client. I cannot present an offer on somebody's behalf without having an agency agreement signed. I can offer to switch. I can offer to downgrade them. Fine. If you don't want to be my client, then I'll downgrade you to my customer. That would make me take me from a buyer's agent to a seller sub-agent. The switch isn't the recommended practice, because before we switch, we have to notify the buyer in writing. If I downgrade you, I no longer owe you that confidentiality. And when I switch from a buyer's agent to a seller sub-agent, where's my loyalty go now? To the seller. So buyer, remember everything you told me about your price, term, and motive? If you get downgraded, I now have a duty to share that with my seller. It's not a recommended practice. And guys, again, if I can be very honest, I think if we're doing our job right, I think if we're doing a good job at our job, and this comes with practice and experience, buyers are going to be more than willing to sign before we present. Reserve switching as the absolute last resort, and explain to them in writing what happens, what that means to them. You're bumping them from first class and you're putting them in coach. And as a seller sub-agent now, your loyalty Another option we have before we do this, again, this is last ditch effort right here. We do have the ability in our buyer agency agreement to create agency just for one address. So if they're reluctant to enter into a written agency agreement with you, we can do a buyer's agency agreement just for 123 Main Street. If we go under contract and they close, I'll represent them. If they don't, we're done. We move on. Again, we'll see that when we look at our buyer's agency agreement. I cannot present an offer as a buyer's agent if I don't have a signed buyer's agency agreement. And if they say, I'm not signing, and I really don't like the idea of downgrading, so I'm not going to let you be a seller subagent, I'm out. I have no other legal capacity to work with them. If it can't be your buyer's agent and I can't be a seller subagent, if you're not going to be my client or my customer, that's it. Those are my only choices. Again, this is why right here is why some agents or firms have practices not to do oral buyer agency. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, maybe you'll join a firm that has that practice, but I need to get you through the test first. Are you allowed to do oral buyer agency? Yes. Whether or not you're going to do it or not, that's a different conversation for a different day. Everybody with me? Don't get in your own way. If we're in an oral buyer agency agreement, we're going to orally discuss dual agency. Remember, you guys, the seller has already signed a listing agreement before we ever listed the property, before I went out and measured and took pictures, before I performed a single service for the seller. We already have the seller's yes or no to dual agency in writing. The buyers, maybe we have an oral consent to do dual agency. This first bullet point says, if the seller has said yes in writing, the seller has said yes to dual in writing. This is the seller. The seller has said yes to dual in writing. The buyer verbally has said no to dual. The seller said yes in writing. The buyer verbally said no. We can have the buyer change their mind orally because one party is oral. If the seller said no and the buyer said yes, and we're asking the seller to change their mind, we can have the seller change their mind orally because I have one party oral. If both parties have said no in writing, or either party, let me rephrase that. If either party has said no in writing, then we got to get both of them to change their mind in writing. So big picture, if anybody has said yes orally, we can change our mind orally. If both parties have said no orally, then we got to get both parties to change their mind. I'm sorry, no in writing. Then we got to get both parties to change their mind in writing. And that goes back to the situations we looked at briefly the other day in class. Go back to pages 163 and 164. I'm sorry, 162 and 163, 162 and 163. Those situations walk you through the scenarios. I like those situations. So how we change our mind. Let's pretend we're in a different market. Let's pretend it's not this crazy market where homes are just flying off the shelf and we're on the market for like 12 hours before we go under contract. Okay. When we get back to normal, whatever the heck that means, you may have a listing for a month, 3 months, 6 months before you have a seriously interested buyer. You meet with the seller, you discuss dual agency, and the seller says, no, I'm not going to do that. How is that in my best interest? So the seller says no to dual in writing. Fast forward 6 months, we haven't had many showings, we haven't had any offers, the seller's starting to get a little discouraged. And all of a sudden you have a buyer from your firm that wants to see the listing. You go back and have a conversation with the seller again. After 6 months, may they be more willing to change their mind? Maybe, right? Have the conversation with them again. If they change their mind, if the buyer has said yes orally, the seller can change their mind orally. If the buyer has said yes in writing, then we have to get the seller to change their mind in writing. If the seller's changing their mind, we do have to get it in writing before we present the offer. We can get an oral agreement to show the property. But when the buyer wants to make an offer, we need to get the seller to change their mind in writing. It's as simple as strike through, change, have all parties initial and date. Again, we'll talk about contracts, units 9 and 10. So look at the scenarios, 162, 163. Let's walk through the scenarios that we just talked about. Somebody said dual is not good for the client. You are absolutely right. Dual does not have the best interest for the seller or the buyers. I mean, you know, again, you guys tell me you're here because you want to help people. And now here I am babbling on about how there are opportunities that you may not have their best interest in mind. I agree. Dual is not what's good for the client, which is why we have to enter into dual agency with informed written consent of both parties. They need to understand what we're giving up. Why isn't it a good choice? Because I switch roles. I can't give you advice. I can't be your advocate. I'm downgrading myself. Remember, I'm going from the coach to the referee. I'm no longer on the sidelines rooting for you. I'm helping both parties get through the transaction with equal loyalty to both. I'm serving two kings. And that is exactly why we enter into dual agency with informed written consent. Have you guys written that down yet? It's intentionally created with informed written consent. Y'all going to be dreaming about that before it's over. You know you're doing good when you start dreaming about this stuff. Again, you guys, we spent a lot of time on Tuesday talking about dual agency designated. We'll mention it again in Unit 8. These are topics, you guys, I think the best way for you guys to fully grasp it is to go over it and over it and over it. Review the PowerPoints, review the class, review your book. When we move on from agency, like next week, you guys got to keep spending time on agency because we still got to go through like what, the middle of May or something, right? So we still have a lot more to cover. Don't put agency down and expect to pick it back up the day before your exam. Okay. Keep going, keep going. Remember me mentioning 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. Now going forward, we should always be studying 7, 8, 9, and 10. I did have a pre-licensing student tell me once that I had her waking up in the middle of the night going 7, 8, 9, and 10. I said, perfect. That's exactly where I need you to be. Dream about this stuff. I don't want you to have nightmares about it, but perfect. Okay. Let's go ahead and take our break. We come back, we're about done with Unit 7. So let's take 10 and we'll wrap that up. All right. So let's take attendance. Welcome back. The last little piece of Unit 7 we have to talk about is kind of your relationship with your firm. And we're going to talk, we're going to go off book. I know you guys got a lot of questions about what happens when I do get my license. So I want to try to address some of those now. First off, let's talk about kind of the big picture. The boss, let's call him. Each office location has a broker in charge. There's a designated broker in charge for each office location. I need a designated BIC under every single roof. So if you're going to affiliate with a firm that has 5 office locations, how many designated BICs does the firm have to have? They have to have 5. So you got 1 designated BIC under each roof. Everybody good so far? That designated BIC is responsible for the day-to-day operations of that office. Now, they may report to the firm, whoever owns the company, but they are ultimately responsible for the day-to-day operations of the office. One of the broker in charge's biggest responsibilities is soon to be you guys. PB means provisional broker. So let's pause here for just a second and talk about what this means. Once you get your license, the day you pass your state exam, you're handed a license on inactive status. And on inactive status, you cannot do anything with it. You can't practice, you can't get paid, you can't do anything. Good job. As a provisional broker, to activate your license, you have to affiliate with a firm. You have to have a broker in charge take you under their wing. So once you get your license, it's inactive. You activate your license by affiliating with a firm. Some agents choose, and this is up to you. I cannot answer this for you. Some agents choose to get their license, affiliate with a firm, and activate, and then take their post-licensing courses. I'll talk about post-licensing in just a second. So you get your license, affiliate with a firm, activate, and then take post-licensing. Some agents choose to knock out post-licensing before they affiliate, before they start their career. There's no wrong way to do that. Some want to get post done as fast as they can. Some of you are rip-roaring ready to go and want to jump in and get started. What you need to know as a provisional broker, you do not have an active license. You cannot practice until you're under the wing of a broker in charge. As a provisional broker, to drop your provisional status, you have to complete the 90 hours of post-licensing. So post-licensing is broken down into 3 30-hour courses. Remember what we said, pre-licensing is just the beginning of your training and education. You drop your provisional status by completing the 90-hour post-licensing. You have 18 months from licensure to take your post-licensing, 18 months. So whatever day you get your license, start your 18-month clock. And when you get your license, happen to have mine right here. When you get your license, there is a date on your license. So when you receive it, you have a date, and that date starts your 18-month clock. Once you complete post-licensing, you drop your provisional status and you're just a broker. Most of us are just brokers. As a broker, maybe you go out on your own, maybe you stay affiliated with a firm. Your possibilities are endless. Those are further away goals. We'll talk a little bit more about going out on your own, starting your own firm when we get to license law and commission rule. Let's see, as soon as you have to activate your license. So you can get your license today, affiliate with a firm and activate today, right? You activate it by affiliating with a firm. Again, some of you are more ready to go than others, and I get that. So maybe you want to start talking to firms now. Maybe you want to start reaching out to BICs and saying, I'm in pre-licensing, and when I get my license, I'm interested in affiliating with your firm. We'll talk more about your relationship in just a second. Questions on the PB, on the provisional broker, or the post-licensing?
I do. I have a question.
Yeah.
You were saying the further education for provisional broker, is it to activate or once you
Nope.
sign with her?
No, the point of post licensing is so you complete that and you drop your provisional status.
Oh,
So once you complete post licensing, you're just a broker. I call my PBs, I call you guys brokers with training wheels. So once you complete post licensing, your training wheels are kicked off. You can now ride alone. The broker in charge, as we said, is responsible for everything that happens in the firm. All the brokers, PB of full brokers. One of the biggest responsibility is the provisional broker. Guys, not all firms want to work with provisional brokers because you are such a liability to them. If the provisional broker gets themselves in trouble with the real estate commission, you will take your BIC down with you. If you do something to cause yourself to get the letter of inquiry, your BIC will get a letter of inquiry as well. Because the BIC's job is to take you under their wing. The BIC's job is, they should be in your back pocket, going through transactions with you, doing everything. Guys, they're not going to hand you a license and let you run amok on the streets. Okay. They're going to require supervision. They're going to require further training. If a full broker gets themselves in trouble with the real estate commission, it depends if the BIC will get in trouble as well. For example, if the full broker gets themselves in trouble with agency, the BIC will get a letter of inquiry as well. So there are certain things that the BIC is responsible for, agency being one of them. So 18 months from the day you get your license, you have 18 months to take 90 additional. And again, we break those down into 3 30-hour courses. Is a full broker just a broker the same? Yeah. Remember, we're all brokers. We're a brokerage state, provisional broker, broker, and broker in charge. We just have different classifications. So a full broker is a broker that completed post-licensing. You knocked your training wheels off. Are there exams with post-licensing? Yes, there's an exam with all 3 post-licensing. I'm here to tell you, post-licensing is not near as intense as pre. So generally, once we get you through pre, post will be, and the topics in post, there's a post-licensing class. You're going to spend 30 more hours on agency. You're going to spend 30 more hours on contracts and closings. And you're going to spend 30 more hours on license law and commission rule. So units 7, 8, 9, and 10, we're going to take those and put them in post-licensing. And then your license law and commission rule, specifically make a note to start reading page 707. Start there, 707. And those are your post-licensing topics. You can take them in any order that you want. You just got to do them within 18 months of licensure.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The post exam is kind of like a stimulation of what we already did, or is it just new information?
Say that again?
The post-exam,
Uh-huh.
is it like an accumulation of what we already done, just like a basic review, basically?
No, we take, in post licensing, we dig deeper, we go further. So we're just scratching surfaces in pre. So in post, we dig a little deeper, further knowledge, further education. When you guys affiliate with a firm, have you guys noticed I say affiliate and not get hired by or employed by? Because you guys, once you get licensed, if you go into a sales capacity, you're not going in as an employee. You're going in as an independent contractor. Now you can be hired. I'm not saying you can't be hired by the firm, but if you're going into residential sales or commercial sales, or maybe even property management, you go in as an independent contractor. For an independent contractor, who do I work for? I work for me. I am my boss. Did y'all know you were starting your own business? This is what you're doing. You're starting not only your career, but you're starting your own business where you are your boss. Some differences in the employee and the independent contractor. The employee gets paid salary or hourly. They are told when to punch a clock, right? You come to work at 9, you take lunch from 12 to 1, you work till 5. The independent contractor is paid commission, and I get paid when it closes. I get a percentage of the sales price. We'll talk about your commission in Unit 8. And the BIC may control what I do, or control what I do, but they can't control how I do it. The BIC cannot make me come to the office 5 days a week. The BIC cannot make me, all I got to do is follow their office policy. Guys, this is the challenge I think a lot of newbies face as being an independent contractor. Your BIC's not going to call you every day and say, Julie, did you make your phone calls today? Julie, did you prospect today? Julie, did you do this today? I affiliate with the firm. Does my BIC want me to do well? Of course. Will they help support me? Of course. But ultimately, if I choose to hang out all day today in my PJs watching movies, I'm not going to see result from that. I don't have to report to anybody, but am I going to see results from my efforts today? No. The other big difference in the employee and the independent contractor is the end of the year. An employee gets a W-2. Taxes are withheld each paycheck. The independent contractor gets a 1099, which means taxes are not withheld, but never fear, at the end of the year, Uncle Sam is still standing there with his hand out. So you will pay taxes, you just won't do it each check. You'll do it at the end of the year. If this is your first time or about to be your first time to be an independent contractor, I highly recommend you seek counsel of an accountant to help you know how much to set aside to be prepared to pay your taxes at the end of the year. And the accountant can also help you know things that are tax write-offs, like, for example, advertising expenses, mileage, that kind of thing. So if you're brand new to this idea of an independent contractor, please, at least your first year, get with an accountant to make sure you can get all those tax write-offs and to make sure you have enough money to pay your taxes at the end of the year. I see this get more new agents in trouble than anything. They get a commission check and they say, sweet, and they run to Amazon.com and spend all their money. And then the end of the year, Uncle Sam's going, oh my God, you had a wonderful year. Good for you. Give me, right? Uncle Sam is always going to be there. They're always going to collect taxes. I asked you guys, if you didn't write this down, please go ahead and do it. Every single firm is different. Every single firm is different. And I think when you guys are trying to decide what firm to affiliate with, you need to talk to 2 or 3 different firms so you have something to compare and contrast. Every single compensation split is different. All firms offer different training programs. Some may have like a mentorship, for example. Some may not offer any training. It's up to the independent contractor to get their training. Those are firms that don't take on provisional brokers. I know you guys want to make lots and lots and lots of money. I'm telling you, guys, I've been at this for almost 21 years. I'm telling you, coming out of pre-licensing, it's of my opinion that your number one priority should be firms with good training programs. I know you want to make lots of money. If you get the training up front, the money will follow. If you're driven by dollar signs and you don't get that training, you're not going to have that long, successful career that you're hoping for. So if I were you guys, when you start thinking about and meeting with firms, my number one on my piece of paper would be, what kind of training program do you offer? That's just me. Y'all do what you want. That's just my opinion, though. Get the proper training out the gate and the money will follow. And that's another reason why I think you should talk to multiple firms so you can find out what the different training programs are, what the different compensation plans are. Have you guys ever heard of firms that offer 100% compensation? 100% compensation means you get all the money. Doesn't that sound nice? But guess what? Those firms that offer 100% compensation, they don't provide your yard signs. They don't provide your e-boxes. They don't provide your training, your advertising. They just give you somewhere to hang your license. If you want yard signs included, if you want training included, you may be looking at an 80-20 split or a 60-40 split. You with me? Every single firm is different. Do we offer career day? That's a great question. No, we don't. We should. That's a great question.
Yeah. Is there a good resource that maybe lists firms as far as what would be a good pick for a training program, or is it just good to research the firms individually for ratings on
you go.
how their employees feel about
Because you're all in
them?
different areas, right? So all different areas,
Right.
not Keller Williams isn't everywhere, right?
True.
Julie's real estate shop may be here, but not there, right? So I would start with Google and I would start with firms around where you live. And another good reason why I want you to talk to 2 or 3, right? Because if you talk to firm A and they offer you this, that, and everything else, you may think that sounds good, but how do you know that that's good for you unless you talk to firm B and firm C? So again, you can start talking to some firms will talk to you now. Some firms will say, call me when you get your license, right? But what does it hurt to go to Google and start searching? What does it hurt to go to Google and start getting a list? Go to firms' websites. You know, see what their culture is about. Go to their Facebook page and see, you know, what they do. Start learning about ones that you may be interested in. And guys, remember, you're not going on an interview because they're not hiring you. You're affiliating with them. So while the BIC probably has some questions for you, I want you guys to have some questions for the BIC too. Like, what is training? And what do you guys do for charity, right? What is important to you? What kind of company firm do you want to be in? Talk to them, interview them. Other questions or comments? And that's a good point. This sounds so funny to say. Before you join a firm, read y'all, please promise me you read that independent contractor agreement. And one thing in particular that I want you to pay attention to is what happens when you leave. And I know it's so funny to think about leaving the firm that you're just now thinking about joining. But when you leave, like, can you take your listing with you? Can you take your business with you? Technically, whose listing is it? Is it yours? No, it's the firm's. So what happens if you leave the firm? Can you take your business with you? These are the kind of things that you want to read that independent contract agreement. Some firms will offer you free training. Is there anything for free? No. And if they offer free training, they may say, as long as you stay with us for 3 years. If you leave within 3 years, then you have to pay that. So y'all read that fine print before you sign anything. Will you guys promise me that? Don't just say, well, I read one on contract agreement and I'm pretty much sure they're all the same. No, they're not. All firms are different. A question comes in, what if I want to get my license in another state? Then you need to go to that real estate commission's website and find out. I cannot tell you how to get licensed in Virginia or Kentucky. I can only tell you how to get licensed in North Carolina. So if you're interested in being dual licensed, go to that state's real estate commission's website and find out. Did we choose to leave to create our own firm? Yes, we did. So my firm, we just celebrated a year. I told you guys last week. It's so exciting. We just celebrated a year going out on our own. We were a team within a firm. So we chose to leave the firm to go out on our own. And guys, agents move around all the time. Don't, you know, the old joke is don't get too used to your coworkers because they're going to look different tomorrow. So, you know, don't get that we move around a lot. Are the points negotiable? Possibly. It's up to the firm's policy. Is commission negotiable? Is training negotiable? Training waived? I mean, you can always ask, right? The worst I can tell you is no. Why did we choose to leave? To start our own firm. We wanted to go out on our own. We wanted to hang our own shingle. How long did it take? Y'all, I still call her my team leader. I guess that's out of habit, but the owner of my company, she's been at it for over 30 years. So she knows a thing or two. Are there agents who are employees versus independent contractors? Possibly. Typically, if you're an employee, you are answering the phone, you're processing, you're filing, you're handling back of the end stuff. Some firms may let you do both. Some firms may say, we'll either hire you or we'll affiliate with you. But a lot of the times our employees are, y'all, your staff is amazing. They work hard to make you look good. So a lot of times your staff are employees, but you can have licensed staff. When can you become a pre-licensing instructor? I think you have to have 2 or 3 years sales experience under your belt. I got some competition coming. Uh-oh. Do a lot of firms have teams? Some have teams. And again, teams are something for you to think about. Some people teams work for, other people teams don't. So, and all teams are created differently too. There are no rules on how teams operate. So again, something else to, the popularity of teams are growing big time. I think if we can be honest, I think one of the biggest negatives of joining a team, that's a smaller piece of the pie, the commission pie for you, because you're giving up. But I'll tell you guys, for me, for example, being on a team is the only way I could do both. It's the only way I could teach and do sales. So for me, being on a team and giving up a piece of my pie is perfect. Get your license and then call me, we'll talk. But goals, before you call me, what you got to do? Get your license. Can broker take a vacation? So I could work. I'm an independent contractor. I could choose to work 1 month out of the year and take 11 months off, right? I'm not going to have a lot of business coming in. There's an old saying in this industry that says if you want to sell a house, just go on vacation. And it's the truest thing I've ever heard. Because I swear, about the time you're pulling your suitcase out of your closet, your phone is blowing up. And you're just standing there going, but I just want to go to the beach. So it's helpful to have friends. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, right? I'm going to the beach this week. Will you help me out? These are where your coworkers, your teammates, if you choose to go that route. Real estate does not stop because you want to go away for the weekend. So make friends, have people to help you. And then when they go to the beach next month, help them out.
I have a question pertaining to a traveling agent and you have a customer interest.
I'm sorry?
I still have a question. Let's say you're on vacation, right? Bahamas, Mexico, right?
Uh-huh.
And you have someone who said, I want to buy a house, but you live in North Carolina. Could you guys still do that?
If I'm on vacation,
I was just using it as an example. Let's say you're on vacation and it's somewhere like not familiar to North Carolina, like Bahamas, Mexico. And they say, I want to buy a home, but you live in North Carolina. Could you still do that transaction?
and I may not be understanding your question, but my license says I can be involved in a transaction for any property that's located in the state of North Carolina. So as long as it's a North Carolina address, I can assist in that transaction. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, I was basically just asking if you was traveling and someone from another country wants to buy a home, but you're a listing agent in North Carolina.
When you go on vacation, take your business cards with you. Absolutely. I always, my travel purse has business cards. Because if I'm hanging out at the local bar and they say, we thought about moving to North Carolina, can you help me? I don't want to say, oh, you have a car. I'm like, here you go, right? Again, people love to talk about real estate no matter where you are. I know this is giving you guys a lot to think of. I'm available after class if you guys have other questions. I know a lot of you have personal. I'm never going to tell you what to do. I'm never going to tell you guys what firm I think you should affiliate with, but I will give you advice. So if I can help after class, just reach out to me. But again, you guys, let's go back. Let's all remember goals. None of this matters if you don't pass your exams. Okay. So let's keep that picture in mind first. Post licensing doesn't matter if you don't pass your exams. Who you affiliate with doesn't matter if you don't pass your exams. Do I have everybody? Okay. And if you have questions, just reach out to me. I'm happy to help advise you in the right direction. I'm a real estate agent first. I provide the facts, you make the decisions. So I'll give you things to think about, things to consider. All right, to finish up Unit 7, we're going to do a nice recap. So I got some situations, I got some Q&As. So let's go through these things together, kind of talk about some things, and then we're wrapping up Unit 7 and moving into Unit 8. So here's our first situation. Listing agreement does not authorize dual agency. Consumer contacts listing company to see the property. The broker reviews their working with real estate agent disclosure and offers to show the property as a seller subagent, cautioning the buyer that nothing the buyer reveals is confidential, and the buyer should act as if they were talking directly to the seller. If the buyer agrees, the broker provides written notice of seller subagency and shows the property. What, if anything, did the broker do wrong in this situation? What are your thoughts on this? That's right. The listing agreement did not allow dual agency. The seller doesn't want dual. The broker did everything right, didn't they? Their client has said no to dual. So the broker made no attempt to create agency. The broker said, all I can be is your seller's agent. All you can be is my customer. Don't you tell anything confidential. The broker did everything right. They in no way attempted to create agency. What if they show the buyer this property and the buyer says, nah, I don't like this one. Can you show me another one that somebody else has listed? That's a different conversation now, isn't it? Maybe the other seller has agreed to duel, maybe it's with a different firm. So sometimes meeting buyers, when it's your listing, you're going to get calls off your sign. That's why you put your phone number on the sign. And while they may not buy this home, maybe you can form a relationship and help them buy a different property. Does that make sense? Each address is different because each seller is different. Each property is different. So in this property, dual agency was not attempted. But if this one doesn't work out, maybe we can continue and I can show you other property. Comments on that? All right, let's look at another situation. Listing agreement does not authorize dual agency. A broker in the company is working with a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement. The buyer now wants to see one or more, specifically that listing that does not allow dual agency. Oral buyer agency agreement. Maybe. You're happy to send me a direct message. So let's see what we got here. The seller has said no to dual. Yes. Seller said, no, I don't want dual. We have a buyer and an oral buyer agency agreement. We've been out for 2 months looking at properties listed by other firms. But now my buyer wants to see this listing. The very first thing I need to do is discuss dual agency with the buyer, if I haven't already, right? I need to get their oral permission to do dual. If the buyer says, no, I'm not doing that, then we move on. I can't show them this listing. If the buyer says, yes, that sounds good, now we need to go back to the seller and see if we can get them to change their mind. Again, I'm going to say it depends. If we just listed yesterday, the seller may not want to change their mind. If we listed 6 months ago, the seller may be more apt to change their mind. But, you know, don't just say no without revisiting it with the seller. And that's the point I want you guys to see. With the seller, we discuss it up front. We get a yes or no, but we can revisit it. So we revisit it with the seller. And the seller says, my gosh, Julie, don't you listen? I told you no once. No means no. All right. Sorry, buyer, I cannot show you this property. But what if the seller says, wow, it's been 6 months and I'm desperate? All right. I'll allow dual agency. Because the buyer is in an oral buyer agency agreement, I can get the seller to change their mind orally to allow the showing. If the seller doesn't change their mind orally, then I can't take my buyer. But if I can get the seller to agree orally and follow it up with a text or an email, if I can get the seller to change their mind orally, then we can allow the showing. If the buyer walks in the front door and says, nope, this isn't the one, then nothing changes. If the buyer walks in the front door and says, oh my gosh, this is my dream house, then we got to get the seller to change their listing agreement. We allow oral for the showing, but we got to get the seller to change in writing before I can present an offer. If one party's in oral, the other party can change their mind in oral. So can I show the property? It depends, right? I got to get the buyer's consent to oral, and I got to get the seller to change their mind orally. Putting it in writing before I'm ready to present an offer. Getting that scenario next. Yep. So let's look at another scenario here. Listing agreement authorizes dual and designated agency. Buyer agency agreement is in writing and does not authorize. So I got a yes by the seller. I got a no by the buyer. Now the buyer wants to see that listing. What do I have to do to allow that showing? What do I have to do to get that buyer in the front door? That's right. If I want to show this listing to my buyer, I got to say, okay, here's the problem. You already told me no in writing to dual. If you really, really want to see this, then I need to get your change in writing. If both parties are in writing, the only way to change is in writing. If one party is oral, I can get oral permission to change to allow the showing. Everybody can see how that works? If both parties are in writing, the only way to change it is in writing. Spend time with it. Let's see, even if buyer has own agent. No, if it's another company, we're not in dual agency. Remember, dual agency 101 says one firm, one transaction, two clients. If it's firm ABC and firm XYZ, dual isn't a thing, is it? Dual's only a thing with an in-house transaction. Cooperating brokers don't have to worry about dual. Y'all have got to spend time with this. Please, again, you got the situations. I like those situations. Where do we see those? Pages 162 and 163. There's also examples, scenarios, 174, 175. There's some questions on 176. Your book has some good information. Why don't you guys go ahead and set your chat to a private chat? I'm going to put some Q&As up. So set your chat to a private chat. Just chat to me. Y'all ready? Private chat just to me. The working with real estate agent is a mandatory disclosure. Must it be given in all brokerage transactions at first substantial contact? You can tell me why or end. Yes or no, why or end. This would be a fun one to do with a poll. Now that I know how to poll. Some of you are getting ready to kick yourselves. This is an example of how one word changes everything. Must the working with real estate agent disclosure be given in all brokerage transactions at first substantial contact? No, it's only required for sales transactions. You guys like to forget about lease transactions. Oh, dang it, look at you. Had this said all sales transactions, the answer was yes. It's not required for lease transactions, thus, it's not required for all transactions. See what they like? This is not me being mean. I could make this stuff really easy. Would I be preparing you for your tests? No. Did you just call me a meanie? I'll take that. See, if we were in person, you guys would want to throw your books at me or something. So maybe it's safer that I'm here on Zoom. Everybody good? Everybody see why the answer is no? Because lease transactions don't require the disclosure. Does the work of the real estate agent apply to commercial sales transactions? Yes or no? Y or N? Does it apply to commercial sales transactions? So does it apply to commercial sales? Is commercial sales a sales transaction? Yes, and this applies to all sales transaction, regardless if it's commercial or residential. That's right. Sales is the key word. Okay. That gets us through unit 7. What have we been on? It's about 2 classes now, a little bit last week, all day Tuesday, and a little bit today. So if you haven't heard me yet, please hear me when I say units 7, 8, 9, and 10 are heavily tested units. Questions? Key terms, key point review, student quiz. You also got some good quizzes in Learn, Test, Pass. There's some stuff in unit 7. There's stuff in unit 7 and 8 too. I think when it comes to agency, we can lump 7 and 8 together. We're going to talk more agency things when we get into unit 8. Oh, she's not done. No, no, you're good. All right, I know we're just a few minutes early for break, but I do want to go because we're ready to start unit 8. I just don't want to start something and not finish it. So let me readjust my clock and make sure I set it this time. So let's take a 10-minute break. We come back, we're starting on unit 8. right. Are we back? So let me take attendance. Jumping into Unit 8. Unit 8's a continuation of agency. So we've defined agency. We've talked about the different ways that we can practice agency, the duties and responsibilities that we owe both client and customer, and our roles in both. So now Unit 8 is going to explain how we create agency. We're going to get into our agency contracts, and specifically talking about working with buyers and sellers. So we are going to explain agency contracts. We're going to discuss, there's some seller disclosures, which you're looking at, the residential property disclosure and the MOG. I'll define that in a minute. These are seller disclosures, form that the sellers are required to complete. As I said, we're going to talk about working specifically with sellers, specifically about working with buyers. And then at the end of Unit 8, that we will not get to today, but we'll see next week, we get to do math. And it's not just any math, it's fun math, because we get to calculate your commission. So yay, you guys blow my mind. Y'all sit there and say, oh, I'm not good at math. But when it comes to calculating your commission, it's amazing at how good you get. So it's important that you guys do know how to calculate that, no matter what your split is with your firm. And we'll talk more about that split. The other piece of the math that we're going to see in Unit 8 is seller net. How much is the seller? Do you think that's a question you're going to hear a lot as a listing agent? Sellers look at you and say, when I sell my house, how much am I going to get? And we're going to calculate that math at the end of Unit 8. We won't get to the math today. I won't get that far today, but know that we have to look forward to that on Tuesday. So if math isn't your thing, look ahead. Look ahead at the end of Unit 8. Look at the math concepts on commission and seller net. Before we jump in, I need to make sure that we're good on this terminology, because when we start looking at our agency agreements, we're going to no longer talk about a buyer's agent and a seller's agent. The terminology we're going to see is the selling firm, selling agent, and the listing agent, listing firm. So if you guys didn't make a note of this when we first started talking in Unit 7, please make sure you have this terminology. Do you guys see the difference between ing and er? That's what I need to see. Make sure you see the difference. And again, we'll see that when we look at our forms. And thank you guys for telling me that you're back. Okay, so let's just start talking big picture. Agency agreements or agency contracts. Again, we'll break it down into buyers and sellers, listing and selling, but let's just first start talk big picture. There are certain rules that regulate our written agency agreements. Note the word written. Does this apply to oral buyer agency? No, this only applies to when we get our agency agreements in writing. Also note the word must. Is there wiggle room to the word must? It's one of our absolute words if I ever saw one, right? Our written agency agreements must be signed by all parties. Buyer or sellers sign. The broker is allowed to sign on behalf of the firm. Remember, the agency agreement is between the client and the firm. Because the broker is signing on behalf of the firm, it will include your license number. Once you pass your state exam, you'll get a 6-digit license number. Go ahead and memorize that license number. Put it on a flashcard if you have to, but go ahead and memorize that license number because you're going to need it everywhere you go. I often joke, I don't know how much of a joke it is, but I often joke that the Real Estate Commission has absolutely no idea who Julie Campbell is, but they do know who 264172 is. So your license number is your identity. Our agency agreements have to have a definite termination date. They can't be ongoing forever and ever and ever. And when our agency agreements are over, they're over. I no longer owe you old car. You don't owe me the promise of compensation. Can we agree to extend them? Can we extend our agency agreement? Absolutely. Do we have to? Absolutely not. Okay, so when they're over, they're over. And all of our agency agreements have the prescribed non-discrimination clause. We're going to talk about fair housing in Unit 19 and the protected classes. Our agency agreements list the protected classes and tell the consumer that we're not going to discriminate against any member of the protected class. So again, we'll get further into fair housing. That's all Unit 19. Agency agreements are employment contracts. Y'all, this tends to be a problem topic. Please write that first bullet point down. Agency agreements are employment contracts. The client is hiring the firm to do a job. In the example of the listing agreement, the seller is hiring the firm to market, advertise, and sell their listing. What's my job? Sell your property. In the buyer's agency agreement, the buyer is hiring the firm to help them locate and purchase a property. And in our property management agreement, the owner is hiring the firm to manage their property. Hear words like hire, employment. We're being hired to do a job, a very specific job. As we said, all of our agency agreements with our property owners, this could be the seller in a for sale, it could be the owner in a for rent. Whenever you're working with the owner, it has to be in writing from the beginning of the relationship. I cannot perform a single service for an owner of a property without having a written agency agreement. So if I can twist that, is oral seller agency allowed? Oral seller agency. Everybody's head should be shaking no, because I cannot perform a duty for the seller without having a written agency agreement. Buyer and tenants are the only ones that can be oral at first. So let's talk specifically about sellers. And when it comes to sellers, we're going to use a listing agreement. We have several different listing agreements. We'll talk about those in just a second. Let's first talk about why we use a listing agreement. The whole reason we have listings is to create inventory. I'm a salesman. If I don't have inventory, if I don't have a product to sell, then I'm not a really good salesman, am I? So the reason we use listing agreements is because it creates inventory, not just me and my firm, but all of us around the Triad MLS. That's why we put listings in MLS. I'm inviting all members of Triad MLS to view my listing, to see my listing. Bring me an offer, bring me a buyer. As we said, listing agreement is an employment contract. It creates the relationship between the listing firm and the seller. The firm is being hired to do a very specific job. That job is to what? Sell your property, find you a buyer. Listing agreements must be in writing from the beginning. This exception is referring to the oral dual agency conversation that we talked about. If the buyer's in oral, the seller can change their mind orally to allow the showing. That verbiage again, just to point it out to you, is on page 188, next to last paragraph. So that next to last paragraph on 188, I'll let you guys read that. But that discusses that dual agency in writing or oral again. That would be the only oral thing allowed by a seller, is if they orally allow a buyer of the same firm to see the property. When it comes to soliciting business, we have certain rules that we have to follow. Now, remember, my job is not tell you how to be a good real estate agent. But what I do need to talk to you about are things that you can't do to solicit business. One thing you can't do is solicit somebody else's client. NAR stands for the National Association of Realtors. Once you affiliate with your firm, you're more than likely going to affiliate with NAR, National Association of Realtors. It's up to your firm's policy. An affiliation with NAR says you have a certain code of ethics that you have to follow as a realtor. And one thing of our code of ethics say that we cannot solicit somebody else's client, which means I cannot go through the Triad MLS, find a listing that's been on the market for, gosh, in this market, 2 weeks, a month, call that owner and say, your agent's not doing a good job for you. If you fire them and hire me, I promise I can do a better job. Are we all good on why that's not allowed? I hope I don't need to explain that to you. Once the consumer is in a relationship with an agent, we need to honor that. Have you guys ever been to an open house and the agent asks you, are you working with a buyer's agent? Are you working with an agent? Part of the reason they're asking you is, do they know how to proceed? Can they try to create a relationship with you? If the consumer says they're in an agency relationship, hands off. What if you don't join NAR? Well, you still can't go after somebody else's active client. That torturous interference, it's wrongful interference of a business relationship. So anybody that is in a current agency agreement, hands off. Does that make sense? Is that fair? Honor that existing relationship. Other rules that we have to follow with soliciting consumers, we have to honor the do not call rules. Now, I don't know why nobody else has to follow them. I mean, are you guys sick of these dang spam calls we're getting? I don't know why anybody else has to follow them, but we do. If you plan to solicit business by cold calling means you're going through the phone book or 411 and just calling people. If you plan to solicit business by cold calling, you have to get your hands on the do not call list. And if they're on the do not call list, don't call them. You cannot pick up the phone and start calling people if you don't first get your hands on that list. And maybe you get it, maybe your firm will help you. I don't know how much it is. I don't know anything like that. Obviously, cold calling is not the way I go. But if cold calling is what you want to do, we got to honor the do not call list by getting your hands on that do not call registry. There are some exceptions. If you have a former client that is on the do not call list, you can call that former client for up to 18 months after your relationship is over. So if your agency agreement ends today, you can call that client for up to 18 months after the end of the relationship. Or if they ask you to stop calling. Whenever they ask you to stop calling, you have to honor that request. So 18 months for a former client, or until they ask you to stop calling. If you have a consumer, if you get their information, maybe a soft inquiry, maybe they fill out your website and they provide their phone number. Maybe they fill out your open house registry and they provide their phone number. If you get their information on a soft inquiry and they're on the do not call, you can call them for up to 3 months or until they ask you to stop calling. We always have to honor when they say, oh my God, Julie, please stop calling me. We've got to honor that. If I'm a buyer's agent or seller's agent, if I'm working with a buyer, I can call a for sale by owner that's on the do not call list only if I have a seriously interested buyer. I cannot call the for sale by owner to solicit their listing. So if I have a seriously interested buyer, and hear me when I say stuff like seriously interested buyer, this is not you and your BFF getting together to try to get yourself in the front door so you can get the listing. You have a seriously interested buyer. You can call the for sale by owner on the do not call list. Some FSBOs may want proof of funds. They may want to see a pre-approval letter, for example, from a lender to know that this is a serious buyer. Fines for violating do not call lists. We could look up to $10,000 per violation. If they're not on the do not call list, call away until they tell you to stop calling. Always honor their request to stop calling. Another law that affects how we can solicit consumers is something called the Can-Span Act. This refers to mass emails. If you're going to send out mass emails, you have to provide an opt-out option. Have you guys ever gotten a mass email and at the bottom it says click here to unsubscribe? You have to give them the option to unsubscribe. If they reply to your email and say, please stop emailing me, we have to honor that request. So I can't just pick up the phone and call in without verifying the do not call list. If I do want to send mass email, I have to provide an opt-out. Your book also mentions mass faxes. Again, if you're going to send a fax campaign, you have to give an option to opt out. So really quick, I've told you guys things that you can't do. Why don't you tell your peers, set your chat to everyone, and tell your peers in the chat, what can you do to solicit? If you can't call, if you can't email, if you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't solicit, what can you do? Snail mail? Absolutely. Postcards, brochures, flyers. Yep. Car windows. Yep. Good old fashioned door to door. Social media, yard sign. That's a form of advertising, isn't it? Why do I want a listing? Because when I get a listing, it gives me an opportunity to put my name and phone number in somebody's front yard. Social media is big right now. Business cards, handing out business cards. Text messages would fall under the do not call. Talking to random people, absolutely. Passing your cards out. There are some trainers out there. I love this. There are some trainers, when you guys are getting started, they may tell you, and you can use this if you want to or not. They may tell you when you leave your house every morning to put 5 business cards in your pocket, and don't you come home till you've given those out. So that's your goal for the day, is to put 5 of your cards in 5 hands. You can't come home until you get that. Wear your name tag. Yeah, people see your name tag and they love to talk real estate. If you don't want to talk about real estate, then don't wear your name tag today. Billboards, social media, hang out in a coffee shop. I actually know an agent, that's how he grew his business. He went to the same coffee shop and he sat in the same place every single day. And he got his morning coffee and he wore his name tag and his laptop, and after a while, regulars started noticing him. And that was one way he started getting consumers. Newspaper, yes, y'all don't forget about print media. Guys, I don't want to surprise anybody, but not everybody does the internet. So if you want to limit your pool of buyer to internet users only, I mean, that's fine. It's your advertising, but don't forget about print media. Keep that option open as well. Radio ads. Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah. So you see, I've told you things you can't do, but I don't want you guys to think that there's nothing you can do to solicit. Does that make sense? Be creative. Think outside the box. These are the agents that get the attention. Banners. There you go. Carlene's going to make it impossible for you to get your gas until you take out her car. I like it. That's thinking outside the box. There you go. Writing your name on the sand. Billboards. Absolutely. You guys with me? Be creative. Think outside the box. Home shows. You want like TV ads, local ads? Great. Somehow you got to get your name out there. One thing, back in my administrative days, I did new agent training. So I got you guys as soon as you got licensed. And one of your first homework assignments with me, I even gave homework back then too. And one of your first homework assignments with me is to take a piece of paper and write 1 through 100. And then sit down and list 100 people that you know. 100 people that you know. And the first 40, 50, 60 are pretty easy. But after a while, you're stretching. And you're thinking like your dentist, your mailman. You know what my point of that exercise is? Is to get you thinking about everybody. Because a lot of people build their business on their center of influence. So start with who do you know? Because you don't know who they know, right? So if you know 100 people, do those 100 people know 100 people? I mean, that's math I can't even do without a calculator. So start thinking about ways, and I think center of influence, who do you know, is the way to go. Sierra just wants another tattoo. Okay, good ideas. Good ideas. Things for you guys to be thinking of. Yep. TikTok. Partying, set up events, throw a party celebration. You got to get out and socialize and network. A lot of this, we're salesmen, and salesmen are about networking. It's about getting out there. A foreign broker is referred to anyone outside of the state of North Carolina. So let's talk about agent to agent referral fees. When we talk about soliciting and your center of influence, don't forget the people that live outside of North Carolina. Because even though your license is only good for properties located in North Carolina, I can still refer business outside. If you're receiving business from a referral, you have to have a license or an active license in good standing. And you cannot go to that state to conduct business. So, for example, I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I know you can't tell that by listening to me, but I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and I have family and friends up there. If my cousin called me and said, Julie, we're moving, can you help me? Don't say no, because you're not in North Carolina. Say, you bet I can. I can do an agent to agent referral. I can find her an agent in Pennsylvania, and I can take a referral fee. How much of a referral fee am I going to get? It's up to company policy, and it's completely negotiable. There is no set referral fee. The key to that is, though, my license is only good in North Carolina. So I cannot go to Pennsylvania to assist in that transaction. Does that make sense? I got to stay in my ground, in my territory. But don't overlook people that aren't right here. Think about family and friends that you have in other states. I'm telling you guys, referral business is the easiest business you'll ever get. If you can get that layer of income, pretty much what you're saying is, Bob, this is Mary, Mary, this is Bob. And when it closes, you get paid. How about that? So don't forget about people in other parts of the world. When we cooperate among other brokers, when we share around other brokers, there's some rules, there's some laws that we have to abide by. And one of the laws that we have to abide by is Sherman's Antitrust Act. And the whole point of antitrust laws is to prohibit monopolies. A monopoly is where one entity dominates the entire market. I need you guys to understand that real estate is a market. We're an open market. We're not like Time Warner Cable, right? We don't dominate, we don't control one market. So we don't want to restrain trade. We don't want to restrain activities. And antitrust laws specifically mention a few things. One thing that antitrust laws addresses is price fixing. Price fixing is any collaboration to set fees. When we talk about price fixing, our commission is set by the firm. Each firm regulates their own commission. The local board of realtors doesn't tell us how much to charge. National Association of Realtors doesn't tell us how much to charge. Each commission is determined by the firm. You guys need to be very, very careful. When you're at your listing appointment, the seller will look at you and say, how much do you charge? What's your commission? And you need to be very careful how you respond to that. Do not say, we all charge X amount. You've just engaged in price fixing, and that's a violation of Sherman's Antitrust Act. Your response to the seller is, my firm charges X amount. Because commission, referral fees, all of that is regulated by the firm's policy. The National Association of Realtors is currently in the throes of a major lawsuit with the Department of Justice. And there's several things going on. I'll let you Google it after class if you really want to know more about it. But one thing that NAR is being accused of is price fixing. And NAR has said, whoa, 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 we have never told anybody what to charge. And I'll agree with them on that. NAR has never told us this is commission. It could vary from area to area. We got to remain competitive, but there is no set commission. There is no, it's all up to the firm's policy. When you join your firm, they'll discuss your policy with them. They'll tell you how much of their commission they're going to share with you. Another violation of Sherman Antitrust Act, excuse me, is group boycotting. Group boycotting is two or more businesses coming together to conspire to drive another business out. We can't work together to drive businesses out. Again, this is an open market. Let's say, for example, your buyer has a bad experience with a home inspector for whatever reason. They didn't feel that the home inspector did a good job. They didn't give a good report. They just weren't happy. First off, guys, go easy. Does everybody have a bad day every once in a while? Please shake your head yes. If you don't, I want to talk to you after class and learn what your secret is. We all have a bad day every once in a while, right? So go easy on the home inspector. Going forward, I don't have to recommend that home inspector to my buyers, right? If I have a bad experience, I don't have to say, don't you use this. I don't have to recommend them. What I can't do is go on social media or go to my office and say, guys, I've had a bad experience. Let's nobody use this home inspector. Let's nobody call this guy. We can't work together to drive somebody else out of business. Y'all trust me. If the home inspector is really that bad, they'll drive themselves out. They don't need your help. Okay. I see this a lot on social media. We have like private Facebook groups and stuff like that that you can join if you're licensed, if you want. And I see this a lot. Agents have a bad experience and say, don't call Julie's home inspection company. That could lead to group boycotting. If you have a bad experience, you can choose not to use them again, but don't encourage others to join with you. Does that make sense? Group boycotting. The other antitrust that we have is allocating or dividing the markets. Remember, my license says I can assist in a transaction with any property that's located within the state of North Carolina. I, for example, may choose to only work Forsyth County. Maybe that's the market I want to work and that's all I want to work. If it's out of Forsyth County, I'm not going to touch it. That's my choice. What I can't do is get with you and say, all right, I'm going to work Forsyth, you work Guilford. I'm not going to go into Guilford and you're not going to come into Forsyth. I have just as much a right to go into Guilford as what you do to have to come into Forsyth. We can't divvy that market. We can't allocate, divide those markets. Penalties for violating antitrust laws. Gee, Julie, what's the big deal? You're looking at $100,000 in fines, up to $100,000 in fines, and up to 3 years in prison. Is it a big deal to price fix? I sure think so. Again, this is why I want you guys to be very careful about what you say, how you say it. Antitrust laws. How do you earn a fee? How do you earn a commission? Typically, our commission is going to be a percentage of the sales price. Y'all remember what the word of means in a math problem? The word of means what? Multiply. So we're getting paid a percent, take the sales price times a percent. Typically, that's how we're paid. What's that percentage? That's up to your firm's policy. Maybe commission could be a flat fee. If you want to get paid, you have to have an active license. You cannot get paid if your license is anything other than active. And you either need to be affiliated by the firm that has the listing agreement, or you're the one that brings the buyer. There are two parties to the transaction, the seller and the buyer. And if you want to be paid, you need to be associated either with the firm that has the listing or the one that brings the buyer. Again, how do you get paid? That's up to your firm's policy. Another reason why I want you guys to talk to several different firms, because they all have a different compensation split. We'll talk a little bit more about your commission. There's a difference in when we earn our commission versus when we actually get paid. Technically, I've earned my commission. I've done my job when I connected a ready, willing, and able buyer with a seller. Technically, that's when I earn my commission. However, I don't get paid until it closes. If you go under contract, technically you've earned your commission. What if that contract terminates though? We don't get paid unless it closes. The commission comes from the sales price. So if nobody pays a sales price, there's nobody to pay us. If the contract terminates, it's up to the firm if they want to go after the seller or the buyer for commission. It's not up to you. You guys with me? Because it's not your seller. It's not your buyer. It's up to the firm. And I'm here to tell you guys, firms don't want the reputation of suing sellers and buyers at the drop of a hat. I wish I could tell you all things close. Everything closes. I really wish I could stand here and tell you guys that, but I'm not. Sometimes things don't close. Sometimes they don't under contract. Sometimes they go under contract and they terminate. I had buyers terminate. Y'all want to hear a painful story? I had buyers terminate 3 hours before closing. Did I get paid? Unfortunately, no. We got back out. I found them another house and they did close on that one and I got paid on that one. 3 hours. Y'all don't spend that money until it's in your hand. It's not a done deal until it's in your hand. That's a hard lesson to learn for newbies. I get that. So let me try to help you out, help me ease that pain a little bit. Question came in, why do they terminate? I think they just got cold feet. I think that's what it came down to. And they woke up that morning and he called me and he said, we're not coming to closing today. And I said, uh-oh, I hope everybody's okay. When do you want to reschedule closing for? And he said, Julie, let me rephrase that. We're not buying this house. We earn our commission when we bring buyer and seller together. We don't get paid until it closes. Comments on that? That was a bad day, y'all. I'm not going to lie. That was my bad day. I had a liquid lunch. I didn't know what else to do. So I had a liquid lunch. And you know what? The next day I picked myself up, dusted myself off. Went back out, found him another house, and we closed on that one. I get paid. What's the WED? I'm assuming I get paid. I speak that language. With every deal. I get paid with every deal. Yeah. No, you don't. You get paid when it closes. Earning your commission versus when you actually get paid. All right, so let's talk about some pre-listing activities. You're getting ready for your listing appointment. When I'm preparing for a listing appointment, I'm looking up everything I can about the home before I ever see the home. I'm checking zoning, I'm checking schools, I'm checking NCDOT, I'm checking covenants if it's in an HOA. All those things we talked about the first couple units. You'll have a checklist. Ideally, I know everything there is to know about that home except for what the inside looks like. When I actually show up for the listing appointment, guys, competitive listing appointments are very much a real thing right now. And you may or may not know that you're in a competitive listing appointment. So my suggestion to you is you show up at every listing appointment bringing your A game. If you show up to a listing appointment asking the seller what their deed says because you didn't feel like looking up their deed, but another agent shows up with the deed in their hand, who looks better to the seller? The one that did their research before they got there, or the one that expects the seller to do all the work? So learn as much as you possibly can about the home before you get there. There is some information I can ask the seller for. Maybe the seller had a survey when they purchased. We're not necessarily sharing it with the buyer, but the survey can help me identify the property lines. The survey will let me know acreage, square footage, that kind of thing. We need the seller to gather their approximate balances due on any outstanding mortgages or liens. I need to make sure as early as I can that the seller can afford to sell. If the seller's underwater, it means they owe more than what the home is worth. And if the seller owes more than what it's worth, they have to bring money to the closing table. Wouldn't you rather have this discussion before you list the property than the day before settlement, the day before closing? So when we meet sellers, we're asking them the hard question. You're a perfect stranger. And I'm going, how much do you owe on this house? But you're doing it to protect yourself. You're doing it to protect them. You're getting ready for this listing appointment. If in your pre-listing, your conversation on the seller, hey, I want to sell and I'd like to interview to see if you da. So if you're getting ready for your pre-listing, if at some point during the pre-listing appointment, you've hit first substantial contact, then you need to go ahead and do your working with real estate agent disclosure at that time. Everybody with me? Because we're always on alert for first substantial contact. But if you haven't hit first substantial contact and you show up for the meeting, the very first thing you do is you're working with real estate agent disclosure. Sellers are proud. You walk in the door and the first thing the seller wants to do is give you the grand tour. They want to show off. Okay, and I can't wait to see your home. But before we do, we need to sit down and have a discussion. Because that seller needs to understand, first off, don't we need to talk about my duty with material facts, with disclosing material facts? Before the seller starts going around the house pointing out all the problems, don't they need to know? Don't they have a right to know that I have to disclose those material facts? The other thing that the seller needs to understand, especially in a competitive listing appointment, if the seller never hires me, then I don't owe them confidentiality. And they need to understand that what they tell me as we're going through it, when we're at this first meeting, when we're at this listing appointment. So the very first thing you do, if you haven't done it already, if you haven't already hit first substantial contact, the very first thing you do is you're working with real estate agent disclosure. I know this says first meeting. Maybe this is the first meeting, maybe it's not. If it's a competitive listing appointment, you're not getting a listing agreement signed today. If it's not competitive, you might not get a listing agreement signed today. So you may be with that seller a couple times. But eventually, you're going to want to, once they decide to hire you, you want to go through and inspect the property. I always take my listing data sheet, my multiple listing data sheet. I'm old school, man. I print that thing out, put it on a clipboard so I can take it around the house and make notes. Guys, if I can offer you a tip, after a while, they all start to look the same. So once you've started seeing many homes, you're going to go home and ask yourself, did that home have ceiling fans or not? So, walk around, have some kind of listing data sheet, inspect the property, preferably go through with the seller, look for red flag stuff. If you see a water stain on the ceiling, ask about it. Because you know what? A good buyer's agent is going to ask about it as well. So ask questions when red flags go up. Ask if they've had any recent renovations or repairs. You guys remember mechanics liens? If they've had any recent work done, we need to make sure that it's been paid. We don't want a mechanics lien to hit the new owner. If it's on an on-site septic, we need to get our hands on that septic permit. Remember, they say 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. So if the septic permit only allows for 3 bedrooms, the capacity of the septic tank can only support 6 people, right? We can only advertise the number of bedrooms as mentioned in the septic permit. We want to discuss the marketing plan with our seller. How am I going to advertise and market your house? Again, this market, I need everybody to understand this market we're in right now is not the norm. This idea of putting a home on the market and it being gone in 12 hours is not the norm. We're going to get back to a time where we have to market our properties. How are you going to do that? You going to do print media, internet advertising? Are you going to do an open house? And then we also need to help determine the square footage. I'm going to talk about square foot in just a bit, so hang on to that for now. This is all information I'm gathering once the seller has decided to hire me, and we're either getting ready to sign that listing agreement, or we've already signed it and I'm getting ready to list their property. I hope what you guys are hearing is that you may be at the house a couple times before you ever list it. You may meet with the seller in a competitive, they call you next week and say, okay, we hire you. So now you get to go back with your clipboard to get your information, right? So you can gather the information to list it. As I've mentioned before, the listing agent's job is done up front. Their job is to, before you ever see it on Zillow, the listing agent has been working, gathering data, getting this information. So we'll talk about square footage in just a minute. Questions about meeting with sellers, the importance of doing the working with real estate agent. I have to tell them that I've got to disclose material facts. I have to tell them that I don't owe them confidentiality until they decide to hire me. By the way, there is a sample listing agreement in your book. It starts on page 194. Y'all don't look at that one. That one's out of date. I have the current listing agreement for you guys in Learn, Test, Pass. So whenever you see a form in the book, ignore it. Every form in the book, ignore it. I got it in Learn, Test, Pass for you. It drives me nuts that they print the forms, because as soon as they print a new book, the forms change. Your book could probably be a couple hundred pages less if they didn't do that. But nobody calls and asks me what we should do. And they really should, shouldn't they? Julie, what do you think? I would so let them know. No forms in the book. All forms you look at, Learn, Test, Pass. Everybody good with that? So skip and pass the agency agreement. Skip ahead to page 204. Buyer's agents may get their fees a little bit differently. If the firm's policy allows, the buyer agent may collect a retainer fee. If the buyer's agent is collecting a retainer fee, they're just collecting some of their commission up front. Buyer's agents spend time and gas and mileage driving around looking at property. Maybe I'm with a buyer for a week before they find a property. Maybe I'm with a buyer for a year before they find a property. So some agents have a policy, if their firm allows, to collect a retainer fee. If you're collecting a retainer fee, it must be on a written buyer agency agreement. You cannot collect a retainer fee on an oral buyer agency agreement. So if you expect to collect some of your money up front, you got a written buyer agency agreement. Buyer's agents are paid a success fee. Again, we've earned our commission when we've connected the buyer and the seller together. We typically don't get paid until it closes, unless your firm wants to go after the person that owes you commission. I think this is another problem topic, and we'll discuss this. Our buyer's agency agreements are also employment contracts. Okay, all agency agreements are employment contracts. Typically, the way it happens, the seller pays the listing firm shares their commission with whomever brings the buyer. That doesn't mean that we still don't discuss our commission in a buyer's agency agreement. And our buyer's agency agreement says, I will always ask the seller to pay me first. But if they can't or won't, then this is how much you're going to pay me. This is what you're going to pay me for my services. So they're both employment contracts. They all discuss commission. And we'll actually see that verbiage when we look briefly at our buyer's agency agreement. Again, 205 in your book is a form. Don't pay attention to it. We'll look at it in just a second. Learn, test, pass. So skip ahead again to page 211. How fees are split. In a co-brokered sale, how many firms are involved? In a co-brokered sale, how many firms are involved? You can show me on your hand. There are two. We're cooperating together. We're working together to connect buyer and seller. So in a co-brokered sale, the seller is represented by one firm, the buyer is represented by a different firm. Again, the seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with the selling firm, the buyer's firm. Your promise of compensation is in the multiple listing services. So as soon as your buyer calls you and says, I'm interested in 123 Main Street, you can go look up and see how much you're going to get paid when you close this transaction. Your promise of compensation is in there. How many firms are involved in an in-house sale, an in-house transaction? Just one. That's our dual agency situation, right? So your firm, how you get paid in dual agency, designated dual agency, it's all up to the firm's policy. You may have two firms coming together to co-list. Do I have anybody, let's pick an area, anybody in the Burlington area, Witsit, Mebane, anybody down in that area? Hang on, let me go to my next page. No, or at least nobody's fast enough to me. Okay, so Burlington is kind of a gray area. The Burlington area could fall in the Triad MLS. It could also fall in the Triangle MLS. Some firms that are in Burlington are members of both Triad and Triangle, right? So they can service all those areas. But it might be that you have one firm that's in the Triad MLS only, and another firm that's in the Triangle MLS only. And we may agree to co-list this transaction to get it in both places, to get it in the Triad and the Triangle. Again, that's a relationship between the firm. I don't know about you guys, but I would not mind co-listing a $2 million home in Burlington. I can share that commission. I don't know how you feel about that. I can share. So you're in that gray area. Any questions so far? Let's go ahead and take our last break. We come back, we got several different types of listing agreements. So when we come back, we're going to talk about those. Sorry about that. I missed my own alarm. That's why I have an alarm. I can honestly say in 2 years that never happened. Sorry about that, you guys. I guess I got hung up on something too. I was in the kitchen getting my water. I thought, what's that noise? Are we back? Give it a couple extra. I know we didn't have the alarm. All right. So doing the screenshots. Thank you. All right. So let's talk about a couple of different types of listing agreements. The last one we talk about is the one that we use the most often. The first one is the one that we never ever use. So if this makes you feel better, you guys generally don't like the first one and we don't use it, but it may be out there. So we have several different types of listing agreements. The whole idea of different listing agreements is a problem topic. The first type of listing agreement that we have is something called an open listing. And with an open listing, it's not an exclusive agreement. So how many firms can the seller date? As many as they want. There are multiple agents, there's multiple firms. And guess what? The only one that gets paid is the one that brings the buyer. If you don't bring the buyer, you don't get paid. I told y'all you weren't going to like this. And the seller retains the right to sell it independently without you. So if the seller brings the buyer, they don't have to pay anybody. Here's the good news about this one. I can't speak for all MLSs, but I will tell you in the Triad MLS, this is not allowed. I don't know about Triangle and Charlotte and High Country and all that, but I do know in the Triad MLS, if it's allowed in your MLS, your firm will have a policy on how to handle this. We want you to get paid. So the seller can employ as many different firms as they want. And the only time a listing firm will get paid is if they bring the buyer. The seller doesn't even have to pay another firm that brings the buyer. They're just agreeing to pay the listing firm if you bring me a buyer. And then the seller can sell it independently on their own. Let's say the seller is at work and they're in the break room and they mention to a coworker that they have their house for sale. And the coworker says, oh my God, I've always loved your neighborhood. The seller just sold their own house, didn't they? They didn't do it with you. They did it because they were chit-chatting in the break room. So the seller retains the right to sell it without you and not pay you. There's still an agency agreement. That's right. It's still a listing agreement. And I still owe them old car. But if I'm not the one that personally brings the buyer, then I don't get paid. Yeah, we don't like this. Don't worry. We're getting ready to get better before y'all start getting mad at me again. Another type of listing agreement that we have is something called an exclusive agency listing. Okay. The word exclusive means what? The firm's date, I'm sorry, the seller's date and how many firms. All right, now we're getting in a more serious relationship, right? So the seller hires one firm. Again, that firm will only get paid if they bring the buyer. If the buyer comes from another firm, or if the seller finds the buyer, then the firm doesn't get paid. We're a little bit better. We're still not great though. So exclusive agency, dating one firm, the seller's dating one firm. That firm gets paid if they're the ones that bring the buyer. This is allowed in the Triad MLS. In my 21 years, I've never seen this. So it's allowed. I'm not saying it's not out there. It is allowed. I personally have never seen it. So what's the one that we see? What's the one that we like? And why do we like it? The one that we like is called the exclusive right to sell listing. It's exclusive, which means the seller's dating how many firms? Just one. And this one says I get paid no matter where the buyer comes from. If I bring the buyer, if you bring the buyer, or if the seller brings the buyer, I get paid. I have an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. All are full service. All sellers get old car. None of that changes. The difference in the listing agreements is how and when we get paid. And in all my years, this is the only one that I've ever seen. This is the one we use most often. This is the listing agreement that we are getting ready to look at together. Again, I'm not trying to tell you exclusive listing doesn't exist. And I'm going to go back for 1 second. I want to make sure you guys see the difference in exclusive agency versus exclusive right to sell. You guys have that? Exclusive agency versus exclusive right to sell. Exclusive right to sell is the one that we like. Exclusive right to sell is the one that says we get paid no matter where the listing comes from. In Learn, Test, Pass. You don't need to write this down. I got this for you in Learn, Test, Pass. I got this nice little handy side-by-side comparison. You guys make yourself a note. And when you see the dollar signs, the money, that's when you get paid. So it takes the 3 agreements that we talked about and it puts them in a nice little side-by-side comparison. This is in Learn, Test, Pass in the Unit 8 material. Again, all of these are listing agreements. All of these are full service agreements. The seller gets old car. The difference of these are when I do and do not get paid. Questions on the different types of listing agreements? In North Carolina, we have something called the North Carolina Protection Agreement. This protects our commission. The North Carolina Protection Agreement is not an agency agreement. It in no way attempts to create agency. This is the agreement that we're going to use when we're a buyer's agent and your buyer's interested in a for sale by owner. Does the for sale by owner have to pay me commission? Do they have to? No. No, they can choose if they don't want to pay me or not. So let's say I have a buyer interested in a FSBO, for sale by owner. And I call that FSBO and I say, hey, I got a buyer. They want to see your house today at 2 o'clock. And the FSBO says, great. And then I say, are you willing to pay me? Are you willing to cooperate with me? And they say, yeah, we're going to pay you. Are you going to take that for sale by owner at their word? Everybody shake your head no. Y'all, nobody will protect your commission but you, right? So when that FSBO says, yeah, I pay you, you're going to say, great, I got a form I'm going to bring with me at 2 o'clock today. that form, it's in your book on page 212, the in practice. The name of the form is the Unrepresented Seller Disclosure and Fee Agreement. The FSBO needs to understand, I'm not trying to create agency. The FSBO's already gone it alone. They've already said they don't want an agent, but they have agreed to pay me. So that form protects my commission. In addition to that form, what else do I need to go over with the for sale by owner? In addition to the commission, the protection agreement, what else do I need to go over with the for sale by owner? Yep. Keep it coming. You guys got it. In addition to my protection agreement, what else do I need to go over with the for sale by owner? Maybe I could word that another way and this might help. Is there anything I need to disclose to the for sale by owner? Is there anything I need to disclose? Doesn't the FSBO have a right to know that I represent the buyer? Doesn't the FSBO have the right to know that whatever they tell me is the same as talking directly to my buyer? Doesn't the FSBO have the right to know that I don't owe them confidentiality? Don't I need to do my working with real estate agents with the FSBO? So even if they pay me or not, doesn't matter. If they say, no, I'm not going to pay you, then I look at my buyer. I say, if FSBO's not going to pay me, you have to. Whether they pay me or not, I need to do my working with real estate agent disclosure. I owe that to the FSBO to let them know where I stand. What questions do I have on that? Isn't that fair? So if they agree to pay me, I do this unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement. Whether they pay me or not, I'm doing my working with real estate agents. Again, I'm not trying to create agency. I'm protecting my commission. Another type of relationship that we may have with the seller, there could be a limited service listing firm. These are gaining in popularity. We're starting to see more and more of these. Group boycotting says we need to be careful. Y'all don't refer to these as discount brokers. Does a discount broker have a negative connotation to it? They are a limited service listing. They're a firm that limits their duties. I'm sorry, they limit their services, not their duties. A limited service firm owes their seller old cart. What they're limiting are the duties, and the duties might be an a la carte. I'll put your home in MLS for X amount. I'll hold an open house for X amount. I'll put a combo box on your front door for X amount. They're limiting the services, but not the duties. They still owe their seller old cart. Commission is completely negotiable. The seller still pays the listing firm. Listing firm shares their commission with whomever's bringing the buyer. I've done a couple of these as a buyer's agent. I've worked with a couple limited service listings and they all went pretty smooth. I'm not going to lie. The first time I saw it, I thought, oh Lord, what am I getting ready to get myself into? The instructions told me, they told me to deliver my offer directly to the seller. They told me all communication is with the seller. I had one in particular. To this day, I've yet to have a conversation with the listing agent. And when I saw that, like I said, I'm not going to lie, I got a little nervous, but come to find out, this seller was an investor that does this 10, 12 times a year. He pretty much just needed to hire a firm to put it into MLS. They offered me what my firm considered a full commission. The listing firm only collected like $400 or $500, but all they did was put it in MLS. The seller handled the negotiations, everything. It was one of, it's funny to say, but once you took the agent out of it, it was one of the smoothest transactions I've ever had. If your seller is not in the habit, not in the practice of selling a home, this may not be the advisable way to go. It's up to the individual who they want to hire. And again, you guys, we're seeing these gain in popularity. What questions do I have on this? Limits the services, but not the duties. We still owe them old car. Also, when working with sellers, we talked about our multiple listing services, also known as our MLS. Again, I'm very familiar with the Triad MLS. Winston, Greensboro, High Point, Lexington, Ashboro, parts of Burlington. There's no clear line. Yeah, house flippers would be good for limited service. Once you're a member of whatever MLS, you join your firm's already a member of an MLS, Triad, Triangle, Charlotte's is called Canopy. So whatever firm you join, you will join the local board of realtors. The local board of realtors gets you into the MLS. So for example, I'm a member of the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors. And because the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors is in the Triad MLS, this is my MLS. And the whole reason we have MLSs is so we can pull our listings. All members of the Triad MLS share their listings with everybody else. Why? We're trying to find that ready, willing, and able buyer. And there's certain information in the MLS that I can share with other members of the MLS that, for example, the public doesn't see. Commission, my commission. When I put a listing in, I'm telling all agents that are a member of this MLS, bring me a buyer and this is how much I'm going to pay you. We can share, I have a field called agent only remarks. So if there's a material fact that I want to disclose that I don't want to put in public remarks for it to go to Zillow, I can put it in agent only. We can share information just amongst ourselves. Seller disclosures that we're getting ready to look at or see on whenever we meet again. I don't really know what today is. Whenever we meet again, we'll look at some seller disclosures. Those are something we can share in our MLS. Understand the promise for compensation, the offer of compensation is only to those members of MLS. If I want to go outside of my MLS, what if I want to show a property in the Triangle in Raleigh? My commission is not guaranteed. So if you're ever going outside of your MLS, you need to call that listing firm and see if they're willing to cooperate with you. See if they're willing to pay you. My commission is only guaranteed within my MLS. When I put a listing in MLS, it all starts in the MLS. I put a listing in the MLS and I hit submit, and that listing goes to thousands of websites. And I'm not kidding when I say that. Thousands of websites. There are a cajillion places. I am kidding when I say that. There are many places that you can go to find a home for sale. Zillow, Realtor, AlanTate.com, Better Home and Garden, all sorts of places you can go find properties for sale. It all starts in the MLS. I put my listing in one place and they use a feed to go to several different lots and lots of places. Questions about MLS. It's a membership, you got to join. Fees vary from board to board. Your firm will discuss fees with you. Sellers like the MLS too. Sellers like to see their listing in all the websites, and sellers are going to go look everywhere. They're going to go find their house everywhere. And they like to see it. Anywhere it can go, they like to see it. So it's a way for us to share our listings. It's a way for us to expose our seller's listing, help get them that buyer. So what we're going to do now, probably not the rest of the class, but most of the rest of our time together, we're going to go to Learn, Test, Pass, and we're going to look at our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. This is our standard form 101. You don't need to know the form numbers. All the forms have a number. You don't need to know the numbers. But when we're properly identifying a form, we need to identify the number. So I'm going to go off PowerPoint, and we're going to go to Learn, Test, Pass. And first off, in the Unit 8 material, I just want to point out, I do have, and we looked at this briefly the other day, but I do have a sample input sheet for Triad MLS. So, you know, you're not going to be tested on this, but I know you guys have questions. I know you're ready to start looking in this. So if you want to flip through this, peruse this, you're welcome to. Anything you see in yellow is a required field, which means I can't submit it until I have this information. If it's not in yellow, I'm welcome to put it in to help with it, but I have to have zoning. I have to have the deed booking page. I have to have the tax information. There's a lot of information that goes into putting a listing in MLS. List price, compensation. How much am I going to offer the listing? I'm sorry, the selling firm, whoever's bringing me the buyer. What did we look at the other day? We looked at, let's be down here. We looked at the agency. Here it is, agency type. Is it a buyer's agent or is it both? Is it buyer's agent or sub-agency? That's what we looked at the other day. Here's your exclusive right to sell versus your exclusive agency. So the list type, we have to identify the list type. And then we get into information about the property. Parking, does it have a basement? What's its foundation? Acres or lot, fireplace, da-da-da. So when I talked about printing this off and walking around with a clipboard, specifically your square foot, your room dimensions. We'll talk about square footage. We may not get to that today. We may see that on Tuesday. But I have all these things I can select when I'm trying to describe the property. What are the exterior features of the home? What are the interior features of the home? This is what I walk through with my clipboard and note various things that I see, so I know how to put my listing in. Again, you may have an old system. I'm old school. I like paper and clipboards and pencils. You can do it on your phone or whatever system you like, but we want to advertise, best describe the property. Flooring, what appliances, utilities, heating source, cooling, etc. So here's our directions, public remarks. There's that agent only I was talking about, HOA information. So again, this isn't a testing topic. This is just for you guys to peruse if you want. But I know you have a lot of questions, so I put this in here if you wanted to look at it. What we're going to do now is look at our exclusive right to sell listing agreement. I'm not going to go through this word for word. This is here for you guys to do that, but I do want to point out just a few things. We start talking about your listing agreement in your book on page 216. And page 216 over to page 221. 216 to 221 pulls out a couple provisions of the listing agreement. So what you see highlighted in the listing agreement in Learn Test Pass are the provisions from your book. And the Real Estate Commission says if we're familiar with these provisions, then we'll address any test questions that we may see. So that's what the highlight is, things that I want you guys to see, things that I want you guys to pay attention to. You're welcome to read the whole thing. You're going to have to at some point, either now or once you get your license. So, but at least specifically pay attention to the highlight. Everybody good with that? Everybody see what I did there? Try to help point that, bring that to your guys' attention. So we're looking at the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Most of our forms come with guidelines for completing. So if you're not sure how to complete a form, a lot of them come with guidelines to help us out. When in doubt, find out, right? If you don't know what goes in a blank, use your resources and your tools, one of those being your guidelines. The exclusive right to sell listing agreement is entered between the seller of the property and who? The firm. The relationship is between the seller and the firm. Six years ago, 8 years ago, something like that, the forms committee went through and added blue notes and red warnings to our forms. Again, they're meant to pull our eye. They're meant to pull our attention. And basically what this note is saying is if you come into a situation, maybe it's an estate, for example, maybe it's a corporation or an LLC, seek advice of attorney if need be. So it's just bringing you, if you're not dealing with a person, if you're dealing with an entity or an estate, they want to bring you this information. Seller represents that as of the effective date, they are not a party to a listing agreement with any other real estate firm. Remember, the seller can only date one firm at a time. So they cannot have multiple listing agreements out there. Seller also represents that they've received a copy of the working with real estate agent disclosure and reviewed it with the firm. So we have the signed disclosure, we have our agency agreement. We have the term of the agreement. We're told that the term is going to begin on the effective date. We'll talk about that in just a second. And it expires on 11:59 p.m. on this date. So we actually put the date in there. Put an actual date in there. How long is your listing agreement? It may depend. It's negotiable. That's why it's blank. Your firm may have a policy. Maybe their policy says we want all listing agreements to be for 6 months. I just made that number up. In this market, you may not need it for 6 months. So it's all negotiable and it all depends. We have to identify the property. We're going to start with identifying the street address, city, zip, and county, North Carolina. And then we're going to include the legal description. What is the plat? What is the deed book and page, subdivision? What is the tax PIN number? So all the legal description, we're instructed to complete all applicable. Our listing agreement, we've got to address fixtures with the sellers. Remember, we talked about fixtures and personal properties in Unit 2. Remember way back in Unit 2? Fixtures are meant to stay. Personal property is meant to go. If they're going to do the opposite of their intent, then we need to make sure that that is disclosed in our contract with the buyer. We need to have a conversation about fixtures with sellers before we list the property. So we're at the listing appointment. We're getting ready to get this signed. And we have a list of fixtures. And again, I'll let you guys look this over. But we have a list of fixtures. If your seller plans on taking anything on this list of fixtures, then we need to have a conversation about how they're going to do it. When are they going to do it? What are they going to replace once they take it down? Usually, I'm a pretty patient person. Until I see brake lights on the highway. But other than that, I'm a pretty patient person. and my seller says, well, okay, we'll look over this tonight before we go to bed. You know what? I can sit here for 3 minutes while you look it over, because if you're going to take anything on this list, we need to have a conversation about it right now. And remember what we discussed in Unit 2. In a perfect world, the seller will take down this fixture before I ever show up for a picture day, before a buyer ever sees this property. Do we live in a perfect world? No. Sometimes the seller may say, I'm not taking it down until I move. I'm not taking it down until I'm ready. So again, you guys, my job as the listing agent, if the seller's taking any of these fixtures and the buyer's going to see them, it's my job as the listing agent to let all buyers know that when they buy this house, that fixture will not be there, that the seller will take it. It will not convey. So it's important we have this discussion about fixtures up front with the sellers. If they're going to take any of the fixtures, we're going to list them out here. And same thing with personal property. Are they willing to leave any personal property? Specifically, the refrigerator. We got to have a spot, because every single buyer is going to ask you if the fridge stays. So go ahead and ask this with the seller up front. Is the seller going to provide a home warranty? We can track that here. And then here's our listing price. So we come to a listing price. We're going to talk about how we can help sellers price a property. We'll see that on Thursday. We're not just going to blurt a number out there. We're going to discuss with the sellers how we can help them come to an appropriate listing price. The Real Estate Commission says that we are not to have the seller sign the listing agreement until all fields have been complete. The Real Estate Commission adds, we cannot have a seller sign this until we have agreed to the listing price. So this may be my second appointment or my third appointment, right? Once I've investigated the property, once they've pointed out all the problems may affect the value, various things may affect the value. Don't show up to that first listing appointment with this field filled in until you've seen the inside of the house. Walking in the front door can change everything that you thought that you knew. So we have a discussion. We help the seller come up with pricing. And then we have the firm's compensation. Seller agrees to pay the firm a total fee of X amount. This is not filled in because this is up to your firm's policy. Is it negotiable? And if so, how much negotiable is it? How much wiggle room do you have? Because I promise you at the listing appointment, the seller's going to look at you and say, how much are you going to charge me? And you tell them. And then in the next breath, they're going to say, is that negotiable? So how you respond to that depends on your firm's policy. What we're listing here is how much the seller is paying the listing firm. Remember, the seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever's bringing the buyer. So whatever your firm's policy is, and we'll see that split in just a second. There's something called a protection period, not to be confused with the protection agreement that we just talked about. Protection agreement is what you use with a for sale by owner that agrees to pay you, right? Protection period. You guys please turn to your book on page 218. The protection period, also known at the bottom of 218, also known as the extender clause, also known as the override clause. This is one of those crazy things that I got 3 words that mean the same thing. I would put all 3 of these on an index card if I were you, on a flashcard if I were you. The protection period is the same thing as the extender clause, is the same thing as the override clause. Everybody see that at the bottom of page 218? What the protection period says, if our listing agreement expires, if within however many agreed upon days after the expiration date, the seller sells the property, the firm may still be entitled to a commission. If my listing agreement expires today, and a buyer makes an offer tomorrow, doesn't it stand to reason they learned about that property from my marketing, my advertising? So the firm may still be entitled to a commission after the property expires. Again, this is protecting us. There are two caveats to this. One, I have to provide the seller with specific names of buyers. This just can't be any buyer. This specifically has to be Mr. and Mrs. Smith, right? I have to tell the sellers, these are buyers that may come make an offer. I can't just say any buyer, specific names. And the second caveat, if we expire today and the seller lists with a different firm tomorrow, the new firm is entitled to commission because they are the ones that are in the existing listing agreement with the seller. So this only applies if I provide names of interested buyers that I'm aware of and they don't relist with another firm. But otherwise, if Mr. and Mrs. Smith make an offer within 7 days or 14 days or whatever you firm policy says, whatever you agree to, we can still get paid. Isn't that kind of nice? These protection periods, protection agreements are protecting us. Everybody see the difference in the protection period versus the protection agreement that we just talked about with the for sale by owner? Questions on that? Protection period, also known as the override clause, also known as the extender clause. The listing agreement goes on to say when we've earned our fee versus when it's payable, due and payable. Again, I'll let you guys look at that. And then we have cooperation with other firms. The seller and the firm have to decide if we're going to cooperate with sub-agents representing the seller and or if we're going to cooperate with buyer's agents representing the seller, and how we're going to split our commission with both. So whether or not a sub-agent is allowed to show to their buyer customer is an agreement between the seller and the firm. And how much of my commission am I going to share? Not all commission is a 50-50 split. So how much? The seller pays the listing firm shares their commission. How much are they sharing? We're going to spell it out in the listing agreement. Questions on that? That might help you guys to wrap your brain around sub-agency. If you spend a little bit of time with our listing agreement this afternoon. Or not necessarily this afternoon, maybe this weekend, whenever you can. Our listing agreements are a two-way street, which means both parties have duties and obligations to each other. The firm has duties and obligations to the seller has duties and obligations to the firm. So the firm has to spell out their duties to the seller. The firm's duties to the seller, we're going to put forth our best efforts to find a buyer. We're going to market and advertise your property and find a buyer. I have to disclose offers to my sellers. I have to disclose the material terms of the offer. I deliver all offers to my sellers. Disclosure of material facts. Firm or seller acknowledges that firm is required by law to disclose potential purchasers all material facts related to the property that the firm knows or should reasonably know. And the firm also has a duty to provide the listing to the local MLS, to the local listing service. This is my duty to the seller. These are what I owe my seller. Here's our non-discrimination clause. Again, fair housing is in unit 19. The agent of the firm shall conduct all brokerage activities in regard to this agreement without respect to, and here are protected classes: the race, color, religion, sex, national origin, handicap, or familial status of any party or prospective party. Further, we have an ethical duty to conduct such activities without respect to sexual orientation or gender identity. So we have this clear, conspicuous statement about our non-discrimination clause. We'll talk about all these protected classes and our duties when we get to unit 19. Yes, that's on page 218. Yep. Marketing the property. We have to explain the seller how we're going to market the property, when we're going to market, what's the marketing date, when we're going to start marketing the property. And then we have to get permission from the seller to put signs, for sale sign on the property, do an open house, advertise other than internet, do internet advertising. Not all sellers want a for sale sign in their front yard. Maybe they don't want the nosy neighbors to know that they're selling. So we have to have permission to do these things. We have to have the seller's consent, the seller's authorization. Continuing on this page, or I missed it. Yeah, lock boxes. Can we put some kind of lock box or e-box on the property? Seller does not authorize that. Seller acknowledgement. Seller needs to understand, and this is a conversation we need to have with the seller. There are certain risks involved when you list your property for sale. You're putting your home on the internet, including interior pictures. So the seller needs to acknowledge that their home is going to be splattered out there for the world to see. Try to get your seller to depersonalize. Help, you know, and guys, let's be honest, it's really hard for a buyer to imagine themselves living there when they're looking at pictures of your kids. So depersonalize the property, help the buyer envision themselves living there, but it also protects your family when you're not putting their information out there. The seller also needs to acknowledge that the only thing on the internet I control is the MLS. How the MLS feeds to all of those other websites, like I have no control over Zillow. I have no control over cobblebanker.com. So the seller needs to acknowledge, and these conversations we need to have with the seller. I can't control the internet. Seller needs to secure valuable things. We're going to have people through the house. I hate to say it, but sometimes people come to open houses to scope the house out. So if you don't have anything valuable out, then you don't have a reason for people to come back, right? So put up personal belongings. The Real Estate Commission said they've gotten a lot of complaints over the last year about prescription medications. They have buyers and brokers on camera putting pills in their pocket. So have this conversation with your sellers. Guys, when buyers are looking at a home, they should be encouraged to look in closets and kitchen cabinets. Don't they have a right to know what the inside of the kitchen cabinet looks like? That's not a good place to put your prescription meds. Lock them up, put them somewhere else. They can't look in personal property, desks, dressers, stuff like that. But if the closet is going to convey, then they have the right to look in the closet. So just make sure sellers know, lock up, secure valuables, protect themselves and their family. This big red warning is addressing video. Sellers can record, or anybody for that matter. You can record video, you can't record audio without the permission of the person being recorded. Guys, it is 2022. I need you to conduct your lives as if you were on camera, because you know what? There's a really good chance that you are, especially when you go into somebody's home. Sometimes you see the camera, sometimes you can look it up and say, hey, there we are. Sometimes they have hidden cameras, and they can, but they're not supposed to have audio. With that being said, I always have a conversation with my buyers to be careful about what you say when we're in the house or near the front porch, because I can't trust all sellers. And I'm not worried about the buyer walking in the front door and going, oh God, that carpet's so ugly, whatever. That's their personal opinion. They're entitled to that. What I don't want is my buyer walking in the front door going, oh my God, this is my dream house. I will do anything for it. If the seller hears that, what happens to their negotiation power? Yeah, sellers just went sweet, cha-ching, 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 didn't they? So caution your buyers, and even what they say on the front porch, because you got Ring doorbells now, right? So just caution your buyers about overexcitement, you know, stuff like that. They shouldn't be recording. Don't trust everything. There's earnest money involved in the transaction. We're actually going to talk about earnest money in Unit 10. So let's come back to this. We'll see this again. Certain seller representations that they need to make to the firm, how long they've owned the property. Are they facing bankruptcy? The property has legal access to public right of way. Is there a manufactured or mobile home on the property? Is there an owner's association with HOA dues? Is it in a flood hazard? Here's our synthetic stucco that we talked about in Unit 7. Does it have a termite bond? And then we're going to ask the seller to list all current liens with their approximate balance. Again, if the seller's underwater, I need to make sure that the seller can afford to sell. And not only can they afford to sell, which means bringing money to the closing table, can they bring money to the closing table and still pay my commission? So we have to ask the hard questions up front. I just met these people and I'm already going, how much do you owe? What are your balances? But we have to ask the hard questions up front to protect our sellers and to protect us. I cannot imagine getting to closing and your seller saying, I don't have any money. Game over, right? So have these hard conversations up front. Is there a lease on the property? Is there existing lease with an existing tenant? The seller needs to represent that. Fuel tanks, we talked about fuel tanks in Unit 20, so the seller can represent any known presence of fuel tanks. And then the seller's duties to the firm, they have to cooperate with the firm in marketing and sale of the property. They can't allow me not to have any showings. The seller has a duty to provide certain disclosures. We'll look at our disclosures next week. The seller needs to keep existing working utilities throughout the transaction up to closing. Probably the seller's biggest responsibility, the biggest obligation is to deliver general warranty deed. Remember, we talked about that in Unit 5. So the general warranty deed. We'll talk about short sales in Unit 14. We'll come back to that. Photographs and other materials. This is basically saying when I come in and take pictures of your home, those pictures are my property. And I can use those pictures for marketing and advertising. If my listing expires and another firm takes on the listing, then they need to go do their own pictures. I'm not sharing my pictures with anybody. So you need to do your own work. Don't take somebody else's work. And then here's our dual agency discussion with the seller. I really think, I'm on page 10. I really think you guys should read this. I think you should look at everything highlighted in green, but I really think you guys should read the dual agency. This is dual agency as it's explained to the seller. And I think this will help you guys better understand that. So please make a note, page 10, to read through this. Once we get through it, the seller either authorizes the firm to act as a dual agent, or the seller desires exclusive representation and does not authorize the firm to act as a dual agent. So when we say we got to get the agreement to or against dual agency in writing, it's built to our agency agreement. Isn't that nice? I don't have to worry about a separate form. It gives me the verbiage, the wording to have the conversation about dual agency, and then have the seller's initial, one or the other. And if the seller agrees to dual, do we want to take it a step further and offer designated? We're going to see very similar verbiage in our buyer's agency agreement next week. I think it's yet another way to expose yourself to dual agency. And specifically, this is dual agency as it's explained to a seller. What does this mean for the seller to enter into dual agency? So y'all got a note to look this over this weekend? Okay, wish I saw more heads bobbing up and down. I know forms aren't the most exciting things, but you guys say you want to deal with this every day. You guys want to work with buyers and sellers. These are the forms that you're working with every day, so bear with me. Wire fraud. Wire fraud's gotten really big, really fast in real estate. We'll talk more about wire fraud when we get into our offer to purchase and contract. We have a wire fraud warning to the seller in the listing agreement. We see a wire fraud warning to the buyer in the buyer's agency agreement. We see a wire fraud warning to both in our offer to purchase and contract. And then I got a place, seller signs. I got a place for 2 sellers to sign. If you need more than 2 sellers, I have an additional signatures addendum. Anybody that has to sign to convey the deed and their spouses need to sign on this listing agreement. I need to know that everybody that has to sign to convey is on board today. Again, don't get to closing and have a spouse say, I'm not signing that. Now your sellers are in breach. We'll talk about each party's consequence of breach when we get to our contracts, 9 and 10. I also have a place here if it's an entity seller. So if it's an LLC or corporation, they could sell a property as well. And then there's a place for the firm. You put the name of the firm license number, and then it's signed by the individual agent with the individual license number. So that's the very short and sweet. All right, exclusive right to sell. Again, just pointing out the highlights. You guys are welcome to look through the whole thing, but I do really encourage you to look through the highlights. Not only are they testing points, but I think it brings home some of the things that we've already talked about. A question came in, wouldn't it be in the best interest of the seller if they agree to do dual to also want designated? Absolutely. Designated is the better option for buyer and seller if the firm allows it. Not all firms have designated, so we have to have a company policy in place. If the firm allows it, absolutely. Because you're going to have the conversation about dual and the seller's going to say, what's in this for me? And you're going to say, well, I'll tell you what, if you agree to dual, then we can possibly do designated as long as we have the buyer agree to. Guys, please remember, designated is a form of dual. If they say no to dual, designated is not an option. So in order to do dual, you have to have a yes to, in order to do designated, you have to have a yes to dual and then a yes to designated. Again, everything we just talked about, 216 over to page 221. And this is your exclusive right to sell listing agreement, standard form 101. What questions do I have about anything we've talked about today? Agencies are big days. This has been a big week. I tell you guys, I'm teaching a post licensing class. I started it last weekend. I'll end this weekend. And it's the agency class. It's the agency post licensing. So I'm talking a lot about agency in this 2-week period. I'm going to be agencyed out by the time I'm done. I was talking to my husband about Aiden through this morning. He doesn't care. You guys have got to spend time with this. You got the recordings, you got your book, you got your forms. I got several different resources here to help you guys better understand it, better wrap your brain around it. So what's next week look like? We're going to finish Unit 8, and that does include the math. So make sure you look at the rest of Unit 8. If math makes you a little nervous, please make sure you look at the math concepts. The math concept starts on page 242. So we'll look next week about how you can get paid. We'll go through Unit 9. We get through Unit 9 pretty quickly. Unit 9 is a lot of terms. I need to understand defining the terms. And then we'll get started in Unit 10 next week as well. So this weekend, if you're looking ahead, which I really do hope that you are, finish Unit 8, look at Unit 9, and go ahead and start looking at Unit 10. Remember, your homework every single time is to review where we've been and look ahead at where we're going. Questions? Comments? Concerns? I gave you a lot of information in 4 hours, didn't I? All right. Breathe. All right, you guys, that's it. That's all I got. So you guys have a really good weekend.